There's a lot to talk about today. Wars and politics, emperors and their intrigues, the economy and the price of bread. But first, let's step back from the noise. Let's leave the Forum and the Colosseum behind and come to this quiet corner of the city, where rich Romans came to bathe and socialize. This is the very heart of the city, the Baths of Caracalla. In here, we can relax and enjoy the calm before the chaos of the afternoon. The day around you grows quieter. The sounds of the present moment fade, and the steady hum of life in the 21st century begins to slip away. Here the air is filled with the scent of cedar wood and lavender. There are marble statues everywhere, frozen in poses of perfect tranquility. You feel yourself melt into this atmosphere of peace. Your own cares and concerns seem to drift away. You meet a group of friends, and together you decide to explore the baths, pass through the frigidarium, the cold baths, and then the tepidarium, the warm baths. And finally, it's time for the caldarium, the hot baths. The heat envelops you like a Roman toga. Muscles you didn't know you had tense and then relax. Every fiber of your being seems to sigh with contentment. Here, in the steamy depths of the baths, you are completely alone. The worries of the outside world can't touch you, and so you spend a long time luxuriating in the hot springs, letting the soothing water work its magic. Then, refreshed and rejuvenated, you return to the main hall and find a comfortable marble bench to relax on. As you recline, you see the handsome young men and women lounging nearby, oiled and glistening in the soft lamplight. You smile, remembering the beauty of your own reflection in the polished marble. How elegant you looked in your finest tunic, and how perfectly your hair framed your face. In fact, you can still see that same reflection if you look hard enough. Look at the hairstyles of the people around you. What do they say about the wearer? This bald man with his carefully trimmed beard is probably an older man of some means. Wealthy men often went bald early, but they shaved and polished their heads to hide it. Younger men, like this handsome young athlete, might have their hair cropped close to the head. This style required constant upkeep, so it was usually favored by men who had servants to do their grooming for them. Those without servants might have longer hair, like this freed man, or even shoulder-length locks like this artist. But what about the women? Their hairstyles tell a different story. Married women usually wore their hair covered with a net or a scarf, like this woman. Unmarried women could wear their hair down like this one or tie it back with a ribbon. Some women wore their hair in elaborate braids or buns like this one. Others preferred simpler styles. All these hairstyles were not merely decorative. They were statements of identity, of marital status, of age. Now pay attention to the details. What else do you see? What else does the hairstyle reveal? Ah, yes, the color. The use of hair dye was widespread in the Roman world. Natural dyes were expensive, so they were often reserved for the wealthy. Henna, which produced a reddish-brown color, was very popular. Another common dye was woad, which gave a bluish-green tint to the hair. Some dyes were more expensive than others, such as the one made from crushed beetles, which produced a beautiful purple color. These dyes were so expensive that only the wealthiest Romans could afford them. And then there were the decorations. Not enough gold in your hair? Well, you could always attach some. These golden threads were very popular among the elite, and you could get them in a variety of colors. A favorite combination was gold and blue. And don't forget the flowers. Flowers and leaves were often woven into hairstyles, especially for special occasions. Laurel wreaths, for example, were a symbol of victory. Well, that was a journey back in time. I hope you enjoyed your visit to the Baths of Caracalla and the chance to explore the world of Roman hair. Now it's time to wake up and get back to reality. Remember, in ancient Rome, hair was more than just a way to look good. It was a way to tell your story to the world. So the next time you look in the mirror, ask yourself, what does my hair say about me? This is the history of Roman hair. We begin with the girls. This is how they do their hair at the beginning of the evening. They wash it, scrape it dry, then divide it into 2 sections, each section into 3 braids. Each braid is given a name. One is called the garland braid, another is called the French braid, and the last one is called the running braid. It is called this because when they run, the braid bounces like a ball. They use a bronze mirror to make sure each braid is as tight as the last. They admire their reflections, the golden light of the oil lamp dancing in their polished hair. This is how they do their hair in the wealthy houses. Enslaved hairdressers wait patiently as their mistresses bathe. When the bathing is done, they help them out of the tub and dry their hair with a towel. Then the hairdresser begins the long work of twisting and turning the strands into shapes that will last until the next bath. While the women in the lower classes wear their hair plain, the wealthier women style their hair elaborately. Some of the styles are simple, like the Greek knot, just 4 strands of hair twisted together. Others are more complex, like the labyrinth, which requires 6 braids to be woven together in a specific pattern. The women who can afford it buy wigs made from the hair of their slaves, or they buy false braids, which are made from linen and decorated with gold. This is what the barbers do in their shops. They trim the short hair of Roman men, shave their beards, scrape their faces with razors. The Romans believed that the style a man wore was a sign of his masculinity. For example, the short, close-cropped haircut was only worn by men. Women were forbidden to cut their hair this short. A Roman man could also grow a full beard if he wanted to, but some men preferred to shave their beards. In the taverns, the barbers would listen intently as the men drank wine and talked about politics. Sometimes the barbers would join in the conversation. And so it was in the barber shop that news and gossip spread throughout the city. This is what happened in the temples. In the Roman world, the most important things in life were the household gods. These were small statues or images that sat in the center of the Roman house. The family would pray to these gods every morning and evening, and they would make sure to honor them with offerings. One of the most common offerings was a lock of hair. Every morning, the head of the household would take a lock of his own hair and place it at the feet of the household gods. At festivals dedicated to the gods, families would come together and offer up their hair, and the priests would take the hair and burn it as a sacrifice. And finally, this is what they left behind in the tombs. Along with other grave goods, the Romans sometimes buried their dead with a lock of hair. The hair would be placed in a small box or wrapped in cloth and buried alongside the body. Sometimes a lock of hair was all that was left behind. In the empty tomb, the hair would be preserved for centuries, a silent witness to memory and love. As the night goes on, the sounds around you will change. The girls will finish their braids and go out to play. The hairdressers will finish their work and lay down to rest. The barbers will put away their razors and close up shop. The priests will finish their rituals, and the visitors will finish their tours of the temple. The lovers will finish their embraces and part ways for the night. And you will finish this story, this experience, this moment in time. But before you go, take a moment to remember what you have heard, to hold it close, to let it echo in your bones, to let it bloom in your mind. For tonight, we have traveled back to a time when every strand of hair carried meaning. Now it is up to you to keep that meaning alive. A woman stands before the bronze mirror, smoothing out her white robe. Her bare arms are strong, her fingers long and slender. She sees a dark oval shape against the polished surface, a shadow cast by the broad brim of her sun hat. She reaches up to push it back, then she hesitates. A fine sheen of sweat glistens on her upper lip. She turns away from the mirror and walks into the sunlight. She walks down a crowded street lined with shops, their goods displayed on tables outside on the narrow sidewalks. Pedestrians brush past her, merchants call out greetings. She ignores them all. She walks without aim, letting the familiar sights and sounds wash over her. She passes an old man dragging a heavy basket, a woman carrying a clay jar on her head, 2 boys wrestling playfully. She sees nothing. She hears nothing. In the distance, she hears a rooster crow. The sound drifts toward her, growing louder, more insistent. She stops and closes her eyes. When she opens them, she sees a group of men striding purposefully, their sandals slapping the stone. Pavement, their voices loud and sure. One of the men glances her way. He sees only a dark shape under the wide brim of her hat. He does not recognize her. She knows him. She has seen him in the forum, where he stands, tall and handsome, addressing the crowd. His words echo with power. People listen. She watches from a distance, hidden in the shadows. She knows his name, Marcus. She knows his father was a senator, and that one day he will take his father's place. She knows that he is engaged to be married. She does not know why she follows him. He turns the corner and disappears from sight. She lingers for a moment, then melts back into the crowd. The sun climbs higher. The air grows warmer. In a small room on a low stool, the girl with the dark hair combs her hair. She runs her fingers through the strands that escaped her braid, through the tangled mess that her small hands cannot tame. She gives up and stands. She runs her fingers over her tunic, smoothing the wrinkles. She looks for her bronze mirror, but it is gone. She finds her mother in the kitchen area. She asks about the mirror. Her mother is stirring something in a clay pot. She answers without looking up. The mirror is with her father. He is in the tribunal. She goes to the tribunal. The girl sits on a stool by the door, watching. Her father is talking, arguing. His voice rises above the others. She listens, understanding little, knowing only that her father's voice is strong and sure. When he looks her way, he beckons her closer. She moves into the circle of men, some of them friends, some rivals, and she listens. They talk of law and taxes and of a new road being built through the forum. Her father speaks against it. He says the traffic will be dangerous. The men argue. They talk of compromise. Her father will accept nothing. He stands up. He announces that he will go to the emperor himself. The men stare at her father, surprised. She has never heard such defiance in his voice. She has never seen such fire in his eyes. She looks away. When they are alone, she asks her father what he plans to do. He smiles sadly and ruffles her hair. "We'll try to stop the road," he says. "If he fails, then he will build a wall around their house. No traffic will be allowed in then," he says, kissing her forehead. She clings to him, burying her face in his robe. She does not want a road. She does not want a wall. All she wants is to be with her father. The next day, the girl with the dark hair sits on a stool by the door. Her father is gone. She is waiting for him to come home. The sun climbs higher. The air grows warmer. In the distance, she hears the rumble of carts. A group of men come through the gate in the wall. One of them is tall and handsome. He sees her and smiles, raises his hand. She recognizes his ring, the one with the engraved cameo. He calls out to her and she runs to him. When her father comes home, the girl with the dark hair hides behind Marcus. Her father is covered with dust. His clothes are torn. He is limping. The girl steps out and asks what happened. Her father looks at Marcus and shakes his head. Then he looks at the girl and forces a smile. "We were just arguing about the road," he says. "She can build it." He says, "Because I have convinced the emperor to give my land to her instead. Then he will be able to buy another piece of land somewhere else. But this road," he says, touching the girl's cheek, "will bear your name." The girl looks at Marcus, confused. "What does that mean?" she asks. "You will have a new house," he says, "one without a wall, where the road will pass right by." Beside her, a small pot rests on a table. Beside it is olive oil. She dips her fingers in, rubbing the oil onto her scalp, smoothing it down the strands of her hair. The oil softens the texture. It makes the hair shine faintly in the lamplight. It tames the frizz that the dry Roman air often created. Nearby, her younger brother splashes his face with water drawn from the impluvium. His father crouches over him with a pair of iron scissors, trimming his hair short. Roman men, for the most part, preferred neatness. A boy's hair might be allowed to grow a little longer, curling at the neck, but by adulthood, hair was cropped close, simple, and controlled. The scissors snip softly, each cut leaving little tufts of dark hair on the floor. The boy wrinkles his nose at the sound, but sits still. His father's hands are practiced, steady. This is not fashion, not vanity. It is routine, cleanliness, respectability. When another room, a mother ties her hair into a loose knot at the back of her head. She has no hairdresser, no pins of gold or silver. Just a length of cloth, twisted and tied. She is not preparing for a banquet or a public festival. She is preparing to grind grain, to knead dough, to sweep the floor of the atrium. For this, hair must be out of the way. Rome is full of barbers. Men who have the luxury of time and money visit them, lay their heads on a leather cushion, and receive a shave that leaves them smooth and ready for the day. They go about their business with freshly washed faces, smelling of fragrant oils and balms, and a pleasingly neat head of hair. But these are the privileged few. For many, the barber is a luxury reserved for special occasions. For most men, The only barber chair they will ever know is the one they make in their own home. Fashioned from a simple stone stool, a rough piece of wood, their razors are sharp shards of broken pottery, their combs fashioned from bone. Some may own a bronze mirror, small and unadorned, but enough to see the shape of the beard, the line of the cheekbone, the stark truth of a face without its customary shadow. Every stroke a man makes with that razor, every pull of the leathery skin is done with an eye towards self-respect and the respect others will give him. The practice of shaving connects a man to the generations of men before him. This is how our fathers shaved us, and we will teach our sons as we have been taught. It is a rite of passage, a daily ritual. In the public baths, men of all social classes share the same space, scraping and scrubbing, pummeling and polishing. The oil softens the skin, allowing the blade to move smoothly, closely following the contours of the face. The scrape of the razor is the sound of a man taking care of himself, the sound of a man becoming himself. Women, too, use oil in their hair, in their baths, and sometimes on their faces. It is soothing, softening, a balm against the elements, the dirt, the smoke, the harsh sun. In taverns and brothels, women might wear perfume, scent mingling with the sweat of the crowd, the stink of stale waste, the reek of chamber pots. In the public latrines, women may splash perfumed water on their hands, clean themselves with scented oils, dabble in exotic unguents. For the wealthier women, the more refined perfumes, the finer oils and creams, are a luxury, a sign of status. The less expensive ones, harsher, stronger, more pungent, are worn by the women who have to make their own scents, who must rely on herbs and spices, strong stuff, to keep the odors of their work at bay. The wealthy can afford to cover up their smells, but the poor, the laborers, the prostitutes, the servants, their smells linger. A testament to their labors, their lives, lived close to the ground, close to the earth, close to the people. In taverns, brothels, bathhouses, latrines, kitchens, the smells of daily life mix, mingle, make a heady, pungent brew. There is the reek of stale waste, the tang of citrus, the rich smell of perfumes, the sweet scent of incense, the aroma of roasted meats, baking bread, the sickly stench of chamber pots, the earthy smell of fresh-tilled soil, the rich smell of laundry fresh from the dye bath, the clean, sharp smell of freshly cut hair. These are the smells of Rome, a city that never ceases to amaze. In the bustling city of Rome, a new day dawns. In a modest household, a family stirs from their slumber. It's not yet light, not yet time to rise, but already sounds fill the air. A rooster crows in the distance, a neighbor coughs, a vendor's wares are hawked in the street below. For the family here, the day's work begins now. A woman lies in bed with her hair fanned out around her like a halo. Her husband, seated beside her, begins the day's first task. He combs his hair, a simple act made ritualistic by its repetition over the years. His wife watches him for a moment, then reaches for her own comb. She runs it through her thick locks, smoothing out tangles, coaxing order from chaos. Her hair, like her husband's, is practical, cut close to the head to keep cool in the summer heat. There is nothing elaborate about it, nothing extravagant, just the everyday reality of a Roman woman's life. Their daughter, still sleepy-eyed, joins them in bed. Her turn comes next, the loosening of braids, the tug of tangled knots. She too has a simple hairstyle, her long hair bound tightly behind her back. This is not a household of the elite, not where silk cushions and silver mirrors reside. Their dwelling, though humble, is neat. A fresco of a hunting scene adorns one wall, a reminder of the order they strive to bring to their lives. The girl looks once more into the dim bronze mirror. She smooths a loose strand behind her ear. She places the comb carefully back on the wooden table. The day can begin. Pause for a moment and notice how ordinary these details feel. A comb, a pot of oil, a mirror that reflects not quite clearly. These were the beginnings of every Roman day. The quiet rituals that connected one household to another across the great city. The wealthy might have used ivory combs with mother-of-pearl handles, but the well-to-do also used bronze ones like this. Bronze was cheaper and could be mass-produced, so they were readily available throughout the empire. This particular comb is simple, measuring just under 20 centimeters long, but they came in all shapes and sizes. Some were elaborately decorated with scenes from mythology or simply etched with patterns to make them easier to grip. Regardless of material, each stroke of the comb was another step toward order, another attempt to impose the civilized on the unruly. But Roman mornings did not all look the same. Some households were poorer still. In a cramped apartment building, an insula, a family rises in a single-room dwelling. The air is heavy, smoky from the charcoal brazier that burned low through the night. There is no polished bronze mirror here, only guesswork and touch. This family's day begins in darkness, lit only by the faint glow of dawn seeping through a grimy window. A mother wakes, her face lined and weathered like a piece of old leather. Sleep has loosened her braid, and she must gather up her straggling gray strands. Her son stirs beside her, a gangly youth with more hair than sense. She reaches for his unkempt mop, tries to coax him toward order, toward the day that awaits. She knows he won't listen, not really, but she tries anyway. He will go out into the city soon, and she wants him to present a decent appearance, if only to avoid the jeers of the other boys. Their small room is a world away from the neat house with its hunting frescoes. Here, poverty is a lived-in reality, the kind that clings to you and refuses to let go. Still, there is a certain dignity in this family, a quiet strength born of necessity. They may not have much, but they have each other, and that, in this moment of shared struggle, is enough. These fragments of Roman life, both grand and humble, come to us from the pages of history books, from the dust of ancient ruins, from the silent chambers of the past. They are pieces of a rich mosaic, a testament to the diversity of human experience. As we piece together the past, we find ourselves drawn to the grand spectacles of the Roman Empire, the Colosseum, the aqueducts, the triumphal arches. Rightly so, for these structures are marvels of engineering and design, symbols of Roman power and ingenuity. But amidst the grandeur, it's the small, seemingly insignificant details that truly capture the essence of daily life. The murmur of a morning toilette, the clink of a bronze comb against a wooden table, the gentle tug of a mother's hand on her son's unruly hair. These are the moments that connect us to the Romans, not as distant historical figures, but as fellow human beings who, like us, rose each morning and faced the day with all its challenges and uncertainties. She runs her fingers through her hair, pulling it back, trying to make something of it. There's no comb to be found. She uses the edge of a wooden spoon, awkwardly, unskillfully running it through the strands. Then she ties it back with a piece of string. He splashes water onto his face from a clay jug, a makeshift basin. He does not trim his beard every day. Sometimes he lets the stubble grow, scraping it away only when it grows too itchy. His hair is short, but it's uneven, cut whenever a neighbor can spare the time to help with some shears. And still, even here, hair is attended to. Not perfectly, not fashionably, not with any kind of style, but carefully, because to leave the house with hair uncombed, with hair in wild disorder, was to invite judgment. She smooths out a wrinkle on her dress, pulls her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, adjusts the bundle of yarn and thread at her hip, and then she steps out into the street. She joins the throngs of people making their way through the crowded streets of ancient Rome. The beehive of humanity buzzes around her, each person an individual, yet each also part of a larger whole. Here, everyone is a cog in the machine of society. Here, everyone must present a certain image. The girl with the comb, the mother with her cloth tie, the boy with his trimmed locks, all of them step out into the streets of Rome. As they do, they join thousands of others. Look closely and you will see it. In every corner of the city, people are adjusting hair. Men smooth their short crops with their palms. Women tighten their knots. Children squirm as mothers tug at tangles. A barber trims a customer's beard, shaping it, defining it, removing the unseemly stragglers. He combs out the old man's thinning hair, trying to give it some shape, trying to give him some dignity. The barber's young apprentice shaves with a sharp blade, removing the last of the brown fuzz from his upper lip. He watches the older barber, learning, imitating. Soon he too will have his own stall, his own customers, his own reputation to uphold. A fashionable woman adjusts her elaborate curls. her fingers flying with practiced ease through the thick, luxurious mane. Her maid stands behind her, holding up a bronze hand mirror so her mistress can check her reflection, can make sure everything is perfect. An elderly gentleman smooths his bald pate with a silk handkerchief, a vain attempt to remove the wrinkles that time and worry have bestowed upon it. He pulls his purple robe more tightly around his shoulders, attempting to project an image of wealth and power. But it's a vain attempt. Everyone here knows who he is. They know what he represents. They know that beneath the silk and the marble, he is just as mortal as they are. A middle-aged man runs his fingers through his thinning hair, trying to find a lock to pull tight, trying to find a way to cover the expanse of his scalp. He settles for a loose, half-hearted knot, one that will do, one that will have to do. His wife, younger than he, smoother, better-looking, straightens her linen shawl, pulls it tight across her chest, and then she walks on ahead. She walks on ahead, her head held high, her chin tilted up, her eyes fixed on the horizon. They walk together, man and wife, down the crowded street, their heads bowed in unison, their shoulders brushing, their footsteps echoing the rhythm of the city. Their hair, like everything else about them, is a carefully constructed statement, a carefully constructed lie. It's a carefully constructed lie because no one here is truly free. No one here can truly express themselves. No one here can truly be anyone other than what society demands they be. No one here can escape the scrutiny of the crowd. No one here can escape the judgment of the masses. For good or for bad, their hair, like everything else about them, must be perfect. This house has no electricity. There's no running water, no air conditioning. It's hot, it's stuffy, but there is a bathroom. There's a bathtub. There's a bowl for washing. There's a place for a barber to set up his tools. This is Rome. This is a house in Rome. This is how people lived in Rome. And everywhere you look, there is hair. Hair is everywhere, silent, unnoticed, but ever present. Each strand an ordinary thread in the vast fabric of Roman life. And so, the first lesson is clear. In Rome, hair was part of daily order. It was part of respectability. Even for the poor, even for the ordinary, even in houses where mirrors were dim and combs were scarce, the act of combing, the act of oiling, the act of tying, these were small, steady rituals that carried people from sleep into the world of the day. But what about the rest of it? What about the styles, the colors, the grease? Well, that's a different story. In ancient Rome, everyone's hair was a public statement. It announced who you were, where you were from, and sometimes even your political party. Roman men typically shaved their heads. It was easier that way. You didn't have to worry about your hair getting in your eyes or your ears. Plus, it was a sign of masculinity. Back then, the balding epidemic was mostly limited to the elite. They were the ones who had the time and the money to get those fancy wigs and elaborate hairpieces. The real hair game was among the women. Roman women dyed their hair to make a bold statement. They used natural dyes like henna and berries to color their hair red, orange, yellow, even green. They also used makeup, lots of it, to enhance their beauty routine. But don't think for a second that it was all about looking pretty. In ancient Rome, women's makeup and hair were a form of self-expression, a way to show off their status and wealth. So why do we care about ancient Roman beauty secrets? Because they help us understand the culture and values of a civilization. It's a window into the past that reveals the complexities of daily life in one of the most influential empires in history. So the next time you're brushing your teeth or putting on lipstick or whatever it is that people do these days, remember that you're part of a long line of beauty enthusiasts. Yeah, you heard me right. Beauty is timeless. It's universal. Something that people have always cared about. Everywhere. Always. The mistress of the house is about 30 years old. Her name is Livia. You may have seen her in the gardens. You may have seen her at the market, or perhaps you've seen her from a distance as she rides in her father's chariot. She is well known in Rome. Her beauty is legendary. Her status is elevated. But right now, she is having a bad hair day. Her hair is long and thick, and normally her ornatresses can manage it. But today they have trouble. They pull and tug and try to tame the unruly strands, but they cannot seem to make her hair behave. It is unmanageable. The mistress grows impatient. The hairdresser closest to her moves restlessly, nervously. Her name is Amica. She has been a slave for nearly 10 years. She was brought to Rome from a village in Greece. She misses home. She misses her family. She longs for freedom. But most of all, she wants to please her mistress. She knows how important this day is. Livia is getting ready for her first public appearance since the emperor's wife, Julia Misa, has arrived in Rome. All eyes will be on Julia Misa. All ears will be on Livia. People will be talking. People will be comparing the young upstart to the experienced empress. What if people say that Livia looks ordinary? What if they say that her hair is dull, or her dress is drab, or her complexion is sallow? No, no, no. This cannot happen. Livia must look her best, and Amica must tame her wild mane. She takes a deep breath. She moves closer to her mistress. She reaches out and touches a strand of Livia's hair. Gently, she begins to braid it, moving down the length of her mistress's head. Slowly, the unruly mass transforms into an elegant style. Braids are a favorite of Roman women. They are practical. They keep the hair off the shoulders. They also convey messages. A single braid down the back is a sign of marital status. 2 braids, one on each side, show that a woman is unmarried. Married women could also wear a decorative braid in addition to the functional ones. Sometimes the braids were hidden under a hood or a netted cap. Sometimes they peeked out from behind a veil. Today, Amica decides there will be no hiding for Livia. Her braids will be a bold statement. As Amica braids, the other 2 ornatresses busy themselves with ribbons and pins and combs. They add decorative braids, pulling the strands taut like strings on a lyre. They finish. They step back. They look at their work. The braids are intricate. They are beautiful. They are perfect. They turn to their mistress. They wait. For a moment, Livia looks at her reflection in a bronze mirror. She sees the 2 braids framing her face, highlighting her cheekbones, emphasizing her arched eyebrows, lengthening her neck. She likes what she sees. She turns to the hairdresser. She gestures to Amica. With a slight nod, the other slaves understand. They know that Amica has pleased their mistress. They know that she deserves a reward. As Livia rises from her chair, the ornatresses crowd around her. They adjust her tunic. They straighten her shawl. They touch her arms, her neck, her face. In a moment, she will leave the house. In a moment, she will walk through the crowds. In a moment, she will greet the emperor's wife. When the time comes, Amica steps forward. She takes Livia's hand. She gazes up at her mistress. She sees the smile on Livia's face. She feels the squeeze of her mistress's fingers. And for a moment, Amica thinks maybe, just maybe, she is more than a slave. Maybe, just maybe, she is a friend. The sound is soft, a steady rhythm of combed teeth through hair, a familiar music of the morning. The first woman works at the back of the head, her fingers deftly finding the right place to begin the braid. Her nails are painted a deep red, a color reserved for the wealthy. Behind her, another woman combs out a tangled mess of hair, working with quick, sure strokes. Her tools are simple: a wooden comb with bone teeth. The hair is thick and heavy, the color of midnight, shot through with threads of silver. It falls in waves down the woman's back, almost to her ankles. She is beautiful, this one. Even in the dim light of the atrium, you can see the perfection of her face, the graceful curve of her neck. Her name is Asteria, and she will be the mistress today. The other women call her mistress, not because they know her true name, but because that is the word that comes easily to their lips. For though they are bondswomen too, and this house belongs to them as much as it belongs to Asteria, they have no name for her except mistress. The second woman dips her fingers into a small jar of perfumed oil. This is no poor woman's olive oil, perfumed with crushed lavender or rose petals steeped in liquid. It's a scented oil, perhaps with myrrh, perhaps with lavender, perhaps with rose. The fragrance drifts into the air, light and sweet. She smooths the oil along each strand of hair, taming the flyaways and making the hair glossy and manageable. The third woman prepares pins, dozens of them. Long pins made of bone, of bronze, of silver. Some plain. Some decorated with carved ends shaped like little flowers or animals, or tiny busts of gods. These pins lie ready on a small wooden table, along with lengths of ribbon, coils of thread, and a curling iron heated carefully over glowing coals. The mistress sits silently. Sometimes she closes her eyes. Sometimes she gives instructions. Higher, she says, not so tight. Leave the braid looser. The enslaved women nod, adjust, try again. They are careful not to pull too hard. Sharp tug can earn a scolding. Sometimes in stories, even a strike. The atrium is filled with the sounds of the mourning. The women move in practiced silence, their bodies swaying gently as they work. There is no hurry here. Time is measured by the sun's journey across the sky, by the shadows lengthening on the mosaic floors, by the changing angles of light on the white walls. Atria like this are found throughout the great houses of the city. Here, at the center of the domestic space, a fountain murmurs, its water spilling from the mouth of a bronze lion. Slaves come to draw water from the fountain, filling their clay jars and amphoras. Here, freedmen and women gossip as they tend the flowering vines trained to climb the columned arcade. And here, under the watchful eyes of marble gods and goddesses, the ornatrixes braid the mistress's hair. Their work is slow, steady, repetitive. They part the hair into sections, dividing it with ivory pins. They braid it tightly, weaving the strands in patterns practiced over years. They coil the braids, securing them with thread. They pin the coils, adjusting, readjusting, until the style sits just right. When it is done, the mistress rises, smoothing her robes. The enslaved women watch, their gazes downcast, as she walks away, her oiled hair gleaming. A bronze pin with a flower at its base, catching the light. One of the women straighten a stray lock that has escaped the confines of the braid. Asteria pauses in the doorway. She turns, and for a moment, she looks at the women, not as one of them. Not as a sister in bondage, but as an object of beauty. Yes, that is what they are to her. Objects of beauty. In her mind, she hears the echoes of her own reflection. The way her oiled skin glistens, the way her hair shines, the way her ankles turn as she walks. It is 8 a.m. The hour is marked by the crowing of roosters and the distant clanging of a hammer on an anvil. It is time to begin the day's work. For the enslaved woman, the day begins with a familiar ache in her back and hands. Years of labor have taken their toll. The rising sun does little to ease the stiffness. She sits on a low stool, her feet bare and calloused, and runs a wooden comb through her tangled hair. A quick gesture, efficient, practiced, her mistress's hair is a different matter. Behind the closed doors of her mistress's bedroom, an elaborate ritual unfolds. The mistress reclines on a couch draped in fine linen. Her face is pale, her skin unblemished, her red lips a stark contrast. She holds up her head, awaiting her adornment, the ornatrix, a slave whose duty it is to dress her mistress's hair. She has been at it since dawn. The mistress takes her time, savoring the process. She knows it is a luxury most women cannot afford. The hours pass in this rhythm. Comb, oil, braid, pin, adjust. Comb again. Smooth with oil. Pin once more. For the enslaved women, this is labor. Daily, endless, tiring labor. For the mistress, this is art. This is beauty. This is her face to the world. When she leaves the house, when she walks through the forum, or attends a banquet, her hair will speak before she does. It will say, I am wealthy, a bat. I am respectable. I am connected to fashion, to status, to Rome itself. The ornatrices know this. They know they are not just dressing hair. They are shaping identity. They are weaving social language. In the carefully lit space between the windows, the ornatress works, her hands swift and sure. She expertly sections the hair, preparing it for the intricate patterns that will hold it in place. With deft fingers, she braids and intertwines, her tools clicking softly against the marble floor. Occasionally, a pin slips from her grasp and clinks against the cool surface. She bends to retrieve it, her back aching from years of toil. Yet she moves with a practiced grace, born of necessity and honed by experience. Her mistress watches her work, occasionally offering a critique or a suggestion. Despite the weight of their gazes upon her, the ornatrices perform their craft with quiet dignity. They may be unseen, their names unknown to the wider world, but their skill is undeniable. In every twist and turn of the braid, in every curl and wave, there is a story not of servitude, but of mastery, of women who found a language of their own in the midst of their confinement. And so the hours pass, filled with the scent of oil, and the rustle of fabric as the ornatresses work their magic. They transform unruly strands into a crown fit for a queen, a symbol of power and prestige. And when the final pin is in place and the last strand is secured, both women and girls alike stand a little taller, knowing that on that day at least, beauty has triumphed over adversity. Behind the scenes in a wealthy Roman household, two enslaved women are working. The hairdressers whisper to each other as they work. Their mistress cannot hear, or perhaps she pretends not to. They share small jokes. They murmur gossip. They pass news from the marketplace, carried from one household to another. In this way, enslaved women became silent carriers of information. They moved between homes. They overheard conversations, whispered while they braided. Welcome to my channel. This is a production of the Roman History Podcast. Join me and my co-host as we bring you new episodes every week exploring the forgotten world of ancient Rome. Check out our podcast and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Hair was not only fashion, it was also a channel of communication. Across the ancient world, enslaved people used hairstyles to convey messages, and women were not exempt. In the Roman world, enslaved women could own the skills that made them indispensable to their mistresses. Skills like hairstyling. In the wealthiest households, an enslaved hairdresser might have been in charge of not just her own hair, but that of every female member of the household. These enslaved women were responsible for ensuring that every bun was in place, every curl in the right position, every braid secure. Theirs was an intimate knowledge, knowing the hair of their mistresses as one might know a lover's face. They knew how to make the most of a bad wig. They could cover bald spots and failing memories with artful arrangements of real or artificial hair. Hours pass. Slowly, steadily. The style takes shape. Today it might be the notice, a modest not favored by matrons. Its wave of hair across the forehead signaling dignity and restraint. Tomorrow, perhaps it will be an elaborate tower of curls, inspired by the empress herself. Each curl is set with care, each pin inserted gently. The mistress tilts her head to inspect the work in a polished bronze mirror. She nods faintly. She approves. The ornatresses step back. Their work is done, for now. But tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, they will do it all again. And in that time, they communicated with each other in the only way they could. Through the styles they created, through the braids and knots and waves, they expressed themselves. In subtle ways. A complicated braid might announce a special occasion, a simple chignon, the quiet dignity of everyday life. Sometimes enslaved women even used their position to mock their mistresses, hiding pins or cutting off a lock of hair, an act of rebellion as old as slavery itself. There is even a story told of a hairdresser who cut the emperor's hair while he slept and woke up with a bald spot. The ornatrix was put to death, but such acts of defiance were rare. Most often, the enslaved hairdressers worked in silence, creating the styles that defined the age. Think for a moment about the patience required. To spend hours each day combing another's hair, to braid and twist, to coil and pin, with no reward but survival, to know that the beauty belongs not to you, but to the woman who sits silently in the chair. Yet these enslaved hairdressers left their mark. Their skill shaped fashion. Their fingers created the styles that defined an age. They're rarely named in history, but without them, Roman hair would not have spoken so loudly. In the quiet of that Roman morning, as combs scrape gently, as oil shines faintly, as pins clink softly against marble, we see hair as labor, invisible labor. The daily, patient, unseen art of enslaved women who twisted strands into symbols, where here is not just beauty, it is work, it is power. Wielded silently by those whose own voices were muted. And so, as we drift deeper into Rome's world of hair, we carry this image. A wealthy woman seated, still and calm. 3 women around her, hands steady, fingers weaving. The comb scraping, the oil glistening, the pins clicking, the whispers floating, hairstyle rising, strand by strand into art. This was the scene in many a Roman villa. In the days before running water, the mistress of the house would have her hair washed in a large ceramic bowl. She would sit quietly while her slaves washed and dried her hair, their rhythmic work a familiar soundtrack to her life. Sometimes they would use a crane to lift her hair up high, higher than her head so that it could dry more quickly. This was a luxury good. These women did not have the leisure to sit for hours with a bowl on their heads. The mistress might have been a slave too. Her beauty routine was a form of control, a way of asserting dominance over others. After all, the first slaves had been prisoners of war, captured in far-off lands. Their captors shaved their heads as a symbol of their subjugation. So when Roman women had their hair elaborately styled, it was a deliberate act of defiance, an assertion of their status and power. Their hairstyles were a silent scream, a way of saying we are in control here. And so as we drift deeper into Rome's world of hair, we carry this image. A wealthy woman seated, still and calm. 3 women around her, hands steady, fingers weaving. The comb scraping, the oil glistening, the pins clicking, the whispers floating, the hairstyle rising, strand by strand, into art. They would have used a variety of tools, these weavers of invisible labor. They would have used combs made of bone or ivory, brushes made of leather or metal, and they would have used their fingers to pull the strands taut before twisting them together. Sometimes they would use a tool called a mercerium, which is basically a headband with a comb attached to it. They would have used it to hold the hair in place while they worked. And when they finished, they would have used fragrant oils and perfumes to make sure that their handiwork smelled as good as it looked. This was a highly skilled profession, this making of the hairstyle. It was a profession reserved for women, and it was a profession that required years of training. These were not simple styles that these enslaved women created. They were works of art. They were symbols of power. They were a way of giving form to the formless, of making something beautiful out of nothing. So as we look at this painting, let us marvel at the skill of these women. Let us marvel at their patience, their grace, their power. Let us listen to the music of their labor, the comb scraping, the oil glistening, the pins clicking, the whispers floating. Let us hear the song of the hairstyle rising, strand by strand, into art. Let us linger now, not on the hands that combed, nor on the labor that shaped, but on the forms themselves, the living sculptures of hair that crowned the women of Rome. When we imagine Roman women, perhaps we see marble statues in cool museum halls. White, serene, silent, yet in life those heads were not bare stone. They shimmered with strands, with coils, with braids, with knots pinned into place. And the variety was astonishing. There were no hard and fast rules to Roman hairstyles, though some broad trends can be observed. For instance, the very long, almost to the ground. The more elaborate styles seem to have been reserved for the very young and the very old. The young girls whose heads were shaved very short, like the Greek girls, but not as short as the Athenian ideal. Then longer styles, often with braids, were adopted for the mature women. And finally the older women, their hair turning gray or even white, wore it long, very long, sometimes with a golden crown added to signify their status. But these are just general trends. There were countless variations on these themes, and they changed with the seasons as well. For instance, the fashion seems to have been for fuller styles in winter and more restrained styles in summer. And there were also more formal and informal styles, depending on the occasion. A woman's hair might have been a riot of curls for a party, but a more severe bun for a day at the forum. And then there were the accessories, pins and ribbons, fillets and diadems, all used to hold back or accentuate the style. And these could be made of precious metals and gemstones, or of glass and terracotta. The wealthier women might have even had a special headdress to give their hair more volume. These would have been made of linen or wool, and were sometimes stuffed with straw or leaves. In fact, the possibilities were endless, limited only by the wearer's imagination and the coiffeus's skill. These living sculptures framing their faces, holding precious jewels, signifying age and status, were an integral part of Roman women's identity. They were a silent language, a visible poetry, a tangible art form, testament to the beauty and power of women in Roman society. What does your hairstyle say about you? In the earliest days, in the age of the Roman Republic, hair was modest. Married women often wore it parted in the center, smoothed neatly, drawn back into a low bun or knot at the nape of the neck. This knot was called the tutulus when arranged in a particular conical form. It was plain, practical, and it carried meaning. It said, "I am married. I am respectable. I am devoted to my household gods." Girls, not yet married, wore their hair looser, sometimes in simple braids, sometimes flowing free over their shoulders. Their hair spoke of youth, of innocence, of potential not yet bound to duty. The simplicity was deliberate. To the early Romans, elaborate adornment smacked of vanity, of foreign excess, of weakness. To bind hair neatly was to bind character. Steady, disciplined Roman. Fast forward a few centuries, though in Rome is no longer a small village of sturdy farmers. It's a sprawling metropolis, a capital city, home to the most powerful military in the known world, and also scandalously to those who do not cover their heads with a simple veil, but with an elaborate wig. These are the women of the upper classes, the elite matrons and their daughters. Their hairstyles are a carefully constructed display of wealth and status. A fashionable Roman lady might begin with a simple chignon at the nape of her neck, just like the married women of the lower classes. But then she would cover that with a cap, a decorative cap, often made of linen, sometimes with precious metals or jewels woven in. And for special occasions over that, a full wig, elaborate, expensive, and most importantly, made of the finest imported wool. This was a bold statement. Not only could the materials afford to be seen, but the very style of the hairdo was inspired by Greek fashions, by artists, by actors, by those who lived lives of leisure and luxury. It was a look that said, I may be Roman, but I have the means to indulge in the finer things. Meanwhile, across town, another Roman woman might be preparing for the gladiator games. She's not a noblewoman. Her status is signified by her simple woolen or linen cap. But she has a secret weapon in her arsenal, a head covering that can transform from a practical everyday garment into a fierce battle-ready accessory. For when the crowds are at their loudest and the chariots racing by are nearly taking her head off, her female chlamys, a type of cloak, can be tied over her head and knotted at the back to keep out the dust and the sun. It's a multi-purpose marvel, a combination of function and fashion that makes a bold, if somewhat terrifying, fashion statement. Because while this woman may not be a noble, she still wants to be seen. She still wants to project an image of respectable married Roman womanhood. And what better way to do that than with a little ingenuity and a big, beautiful bow? Rome had conquered an empire. But what did Rome do with its hair? As Rome expanded and conquered and absorbed other cultures and grew wealthy beyond the wildest dreams of its founders, Roman hair grew bolder and more elaborate. By the late Republic, a new style appeared, the notice, which we can best describe as a variation on the classic Greek bun. Picture this. The hair was parted down the middle. From the forehead, the strands were drawn upward into a roll, a soft wave that arches over the brow like a gentle crest. Behind this, the rest of the hair was pulled back into a bun or knot. The notice was elegant. It framed the face with dignity, a visible halo of order. It became especially associated with women like Livia, the wife of Augustus, whose portraits show her with that distinctive wave, to where the notice was to declare oneself a woman of substance, of morality, of Roman virtue. Even in its elegance, it was restrained. The wave was neat, not wild. The bun was secure, not loose. The style balanced beauty with discipline, a Roman ideal. In fact, the notice was so popular that many women, including Livia, continued to wear it for decades. Even as fashion changed, but change it did. During the Flavian period, the notice remained popular, but now the wave was larger, more exaggerated. This new look was both a nod to the past and a fashion statement of the present. The styles were a dialogue across the ages, a conversation between the Greeks and the Romans about beauty and virtue and how to display them. This is the classical period of Roman art and literature, the height of ancient Rome's power and culture. And yet, beneath this peak, cracks were beginning to show. The Republic was founded on the virtue of its citizens, but now the ruling class was becoming increasingly corrupt. The notice, with its elegant restraint, represented the best of Roman ideals. But soon those ideals would be challenged, as the empire grew more complex, and the pressures of power and corruption threatened to overwhelm the virtue of the Republic. What will become of the notice? Will it survive the changing times? Will it fall victim to the same forces that threatened to destroy the Roman way of life? But restraint did not last forever. The empire grew richer still. Silk flowed in from China. Perfumes arrived from Arabia. Jewels from India. Ivory from Africa. And hair, too, became a canvas for extravagance. The styles of the imperial age were feats of architecture. Braids upon braids, coiled and looped and piled high. Some styles rose like towers above the forehead, rows of curls stacked in intricate patterns. Others spilled down the back in thick ropes tied with ribbons, woven with gold thread. Hair was not simply hair anymore, it was a crown. To create these towering forms required time, patience, and the endless work of the ornatresses. They braided strand by strand, weaving them into lattice. They pinned coils at steep angles, securing them with thread and pins until they stood firm. They curled hair with heated irons, arranging the ringlets like carved stone details on a temple facade. The result was spectacular. When such a woman entered a banquet hall, her hair caught the torchlight like sculpture in motion. People turned their heads. Whispers followed. Her hair, have you seen it? Who could have arranged it? What wealth does it declare? From the imperial court to the city streets, this was the age of the ornate, the age of excess, the age of the great perfumes. A woman's fragrance was her calling card, a blend of flowers and spice that announced her presence long before she entered a room. The most exquisite scent came from Arabia, a land of magic and mystery, where the desert wind carried the perfume of distant lands. These scents were a potent mix of spices, resins, and woods, a heady concoction that lingered in the air long after the wearer had disappeared. In the bustling marketplaces of Constantinople, merchants hawked their wares with cries of smell, 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 their stalls laden with perfume bottles of all shapes and sizes, each containing a different world of fragrance. There was the sweet, cloying scent of myrrh, the sharp, biting aroma of frankincense, the warm, inviting fragrance of cinnamon. The wealthy bought their perfume in gold containers, small, portable shrines that held the essence of luxury. They dabbed the scent behind their ears, on their wrists, on the delicate skin of their throats. A single drop was all it took to make a statement. But not everyone could afford such luxury. For the common folk, there were simpler pleasures. The earthy scent of the fields after a rain, the fresh, clean aroma of the sea, the sweet fragrance of flowers plucked straight from the garden. Even the humblest of lives could be elevated by the right perfume. It was a scent of identity, a declaration of self, a reminder that even in a crowded marketplace, one could still stand out. Long ago, women used to put a lot of effort into their hair, and their knots and pins would often speak their own language. A simple knot at the back meant she was modest. A double knot might suggest she was conscious of fashion, willing to embrace new styles. High knot, placed near the crown, made the neck appear longer and the head more elevated. Pins, too, were more than just functional. They were ornamental. A plain bronze pin kept the hair in place. But a silver pin with a carved dove, or a golden pin tipped with a pearl, announced her wealth to anyone who looked closely. The very material mattered. Bronze was ordinary. Bone was modest, but respectable. Silver gleamed. Gold glittered. And pearls, rare, costly pearls, turned a simple bun into a treasure. Here are some more examples of how women used to code their hair ornaments with meaning. A veil that covered the face was a sign of piety, often paired with a simple life. A ribbon or a fillet that held back the hair was a symbol of youth and a carefree spirit. A circlet of gold, a diadem, spoke of high status and power. And those who couldn't afford gold or jewels, they would use flowers to adorn their hair, a language as old as time itself. In a world where women couldn't always speak their minds, their hair ornaments did the talking for them. They were a way of showing the world who she was, what she valued, and sometimes, just sometimes, they were a subtle way of saying, "I'm more than meets the eye." Did you know that, in Victorian England, the language of hair ornaments took on a whole new level of secrecy? Women would hide messages in their hair, literally weaving them in with the ribbons and braids. It was a discreet way of communicating, especially for those who didn't have the freedom to speak their minds. For example, a handkerchief tucked into the hat band was a clear sign of a woman's affection towards the wearer, and a black ribbon around the hat was a symbol of mourning. But perhaps the most intriguing one was the use of forget-me-nots, a tiny blue flower that signified freedom and democracy. Imagine that. In ancient Rome, the empress was not just the wife of the emperor, she was a fashion icon. When she got a new haircut, women all over the empire copied her. This is a reconstruction of Julia Misa. She was the mother of Julia Misa, wife of Emperor Septimius Severus. Here's what we know about her from history. Her hair was thick and wavy, framing her face and flowing down in dense masses. This style traveled across the empire from Rome to Gaul to Spain to North Africa. Everywhere the empress went, her hairstyle followed. It wasn't just the style. Women also copied the way she wore her jewels, the color of her gown, even the shape of her eyebrows. See, hairstyles were a form of imperial propaganda. Well, to mirror the empress was to align oneself with power. So you can imagine hundreds of women across the empire in villas and townhouses asking their hairdressers to make them look like Julia. But it wasn't just Julia. All the empresses had their own style. This is a reconstruction of Julia Mesa's mother, Faustina the Younger. Her hair was worn in towering curls arranged in vertical rows. This style also became very popular. Rome was the center of the known world. It was the capital of an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Greece. And the styles born in Rome traveled to the farthest reaches of the empire, a visual echo of Rome's reach. These trends weren't limited to the wealthy elite. Slaves and freed women also participated. In this fresco, we see a woman of African descent with thick, curly hair. She's not an empress, but a slave who has likely been given this hairstyle to emphasize her connection to the imperial family. This is a reconstruction of a portrait of an unknown woman. Her hair is styled in the latest fashion, a small price to pay for looking like the empress. But these trends didn't last forever. With each new empress, the style changed, but the message remained the same. To look like the empress was to be like the empress. Republican women wore their hair in a bun, a tight, severe bun, the bun of the Virginias, the Badas, the matrons. The style was copied by the wealthy and the poor alike, though the rich could afford to add a little more lace to theirs. In the 1860s, Queen Victoria's hairdresser said that the height of fashion was a towering pile of curls, a monument to the industriousness of the age. An elaborate coiffure could take 2 hours to create and would incorporate the latest fashions in ribbon and lace. The styles were copied from the French, who were copied by the English, who were copied by the Americans. But there was another way to wear your hair, the way of the Creole, the Cajun, the Gypsy, the Bohemian. It was a long, loose braid that spilled down the back, sometimes even touching the ankles, a tangle of hair that spoke of a more sensual, more old-world Europe. These were the two ways a woman's hair could speak, the hieratic and the Hellenic, the Republican bun and the romantic braid. In the severe bun of the matrons, hair was shorn close to the skull, a practical style for a busy woman who had work to do. One look was for the unmarried, one look was for the married, and a woman who wore her hair in the fashionable style of the day, a woman who wore her hair in the romantic braid. Well, she was saying to the world that she was neither a wife nor a mother, but something else entirely, something dangerous, something to be reckoned with. This is a woman who is untethered to the domestic sphere. This is a woman who is free. She travels the world on her own terms. She is not beholden to any man. She can make her own money. She can buy her own clothes. She is not dependent on anyone for her livelihood. She is not a property. She is a person. The romantic braid was a hairstyle that said, I am a woman who values my personal freedom, a woman who refuses to be defined by my relationship status, a woman who refuses to be confined by the expectations of society. In other words, it was a woman's way of saying, I am me and I am free.
Ouch.
This is a dress made of human hair. Can you imagine wearing something like this? I can't. But it's also not that strange because hair was used as a material long before it became a fashion statement. Yet beneath the glamour lay strain. Hair pulled tight into elaborate knots could ache, pulling at the scalp, leaving headaches. Heavy pins weighed down styles. The hours of preparation tested patience. For the wealthy woman, beauty was never effortless. It was built, layer upon layer, strand upon strand, hour upon hour. And yet once it was complete, the woman herself became a symbol, a walking message of her family's wealth, her household's honor, her place in society. This is a portrait of Madame X by John Singer Sargent. You may have heard of it. It caused a scandal when it was first exhibited. People were shocked by the exaggerated feminine curves, the off-the-shoulder dress, the way the model's hair cascaded down the canvas, framing her face like an hourglass. This painting was radical for its time, but the style depicted is rooted in history. These are the braids of a 19th century French noblewoman. There are 24 of them, each one an intricate design, each one anchored with a heavy gold or silver clasp. And they're not just decorative. Each braid has a purpose, a function. They hold back the hair so that the lady's face is framed, her shoulders are bared, her neck is elongated. It's all about balance. And that balance is achieved through an elaborate system of pins and tools that I don't even have the names for. All I know is that this took hours and hours to make. Far longer than the 15 minutes that I spend on my hair in the morning. I think there's a misconception that making elaborate hairstyles was easy. After all, there are YouTube tutorials for elaborate hairstyles. But those are for an audience of enthusiasts. People who want to take the time to learn the techniques, the history, the styles. Most women didn't have the luxury of time or money or even training. For most women, elaborate hairstyles were not a choice. They were a necessity. It was a requirement of their social standing, an obligation to their family, a signifier of their identity. It was a way of communicating who they were without saying a word. And isn't that the point of fashion? To communicate, to express, to make a statement? Maybe we don't have to spend hours upon hours creating an elaborate hairstyle to do that now. Maybe a simple braid or a messy bun can speak volumes. Or maybe, just maybe, we can leave the statement making to our clothes and save the braids for another day. What do you notice about the women in these marble busts? Their hairstyles, they're all different, yet they all seem to follow a certain kind of logic. You've got the simple bun of the Republic, the dignified wave of the notice, the double bun, the triple bun. You've got braids, lots of braids, rising like towers on either side of the face. And then there are the curls, the tight curls, the loose curls, the curls that frame the face, the ones that hide it. In the last video, we talked about how Roman women used their hair to make statements, how they used their hairstyles to tell the world who they were. You told me in the comments that you wanted to know more. So here's everything I learned about Roman hairstyles. Part 2. Because if you think these marble busts are just pretty faces, think again. Those curls carved into stone, the knots etched into eternity, they were not just artistic flourishes. They were faithful records of styles that once moved in firelight, glistened in oil, shimmered under Roman sun. To stand before a Roman bust is to look into a mirror of fashion, to see that behind each curl was not just vanity but meaning. And so we drift slowly through this gallery of styles. The simple bun of the Republic, the dignified wave of the notice, the braids of empire, rising like towers on either side of the face. A symbol of feminine power, the tight curls of the empress, copied by women across the provinces, each one more than fashion. Each one a sentence in the long conversation of Roman identity. Hair in Rome was a language, and women spoke it fluently, strand by strand. This is the language of Roman hairstyles. Augustus's granddaughter, Julia Misa, wore towering curls. Not the soft waves of her grandmother, but high, tight curls, coiffed into place with precious jewels. Her hairstyle suggested both wealth and power, an empress without restraint. The message was clear. It's how you tell the story of a woman with jewels in her hair. But then came Nero. He seized power after the death of his mother, the formidable and very auburn-haired Agrippina. And immediately he set about changing not only the look of Rome, but its look. He wanted his subjects to forget the austere, even severe styles of Augustus and his wife. He wanted flowing locks, not buns. And so it was that the Empress Pappia Sabina ushered in a new style, one that would become iconic of the first century, the beehive tall and round, a mass of curls. Piled atop her head a style that said, "We are moving forward, not backward." But power in Rome was precarious. It took only a whisper, a glance, a curl out of place for an emperor to lose his throne. The empress had shown her face on coins with this radical new hairstyle, and now every noblewoman in Rome wanted the same. But not everyone got the memo. At the gladiator games, the emperor's wife sat with her mother-in-law, the former empress, and all Rome saw and knew who was the powerful one. You couldn't miss those beehive curls. The older woman still wore the older style, the severe bun. For a moment, just a moment, the fashion-forward empress must have looked very displeased. Then the unthinkable happened. Nero's wife was seen wearing the notice, not the beehive. Was this a subtle snub? Had the empress gone back to her grandmother's hairstyle to signal her disapproval? It was unlong after that Nero was dead and his wife was looking for a new head covering, perhaps even a beehive burial. That's when the style really took off. Women across Rome adopted it, not just the elite. In Pompeii, you can see the beehive everywhere, in frescoes, on cups, on jewelry, even carved into the stonework of a house. It was a style born of power and worn by everyone from slaves to senators' wives. It signified nothing less than being Roman. The next empress to make a statement was the notorious Messalina. History remembers her as a mad queen, a symbol of female excess, and her hairstyles speak to that. They are extravagant, theatrical, impossible not to notice. She was rarely seen without a diadem, a jeweled headband flashing on her brow. Once an artist captured her in profile, a diadem flaring behind her like a halo. Who was this woman? Was she a goddess? Was she a queen? The artist wanted you to think both. There was no escaping Messalina's gaze. She confronted you with her confidence, with her carefully crafted public image. But her reign was ended as dramatically as it had begun, abruptly, unexpectedly, shockingly. One day she was there, the next she was gone. And it seemed the empire had no interest in preserving her memory. Few portraits survive, none of them flattering. And yet she made a lasting impact. Her hairstyles inspired women across Rome. Even the empress after her, the much maligned and much misunderstood Valeria Messalina, wore a version of Messalina's look. In fact, the beehive, the bun, the notice, they all endured. For centuries, Roman women continued to innovate with the styles, creating braids and knots and coils atop their heads. They were making history with their hairstyles, declaring their allegiance, their identity, their power. Because in the world of ancient Rome, you didn't just wear your politics on your sleeve, you wore them on your head. It's impossible to overstate the importance of hair in Roman life. You can see it in art, literature, even archaeology. And nowhere more so than in the sculptures of women. These are not merely pretty faces. They are political statements. We see this most clearly in marble. The busts of empresses were not simply portraits. They were blueprints. A woman could walk into a sculptor's workshop, point to the curls of Julia Domna or the towering braids of Faustina, and say, "Make me like this." Stone did not lie. Once a style was carved, it spread. From Rome to provincial towns, from statues and temples to coins and markets, the image multiplied. The hair of an empress became a political broadcast. Consider Faustina the Younger, wife of Marcus Aurelius. Her portraits show an elegant wave of curls drawn back into a braided bun. That style, with its carefully cultivated waves and braids, was copied across the empire. Small marble busts of Faustina circulated widely, along with countless coins bearing her likeness. And so women across the empire could see what the emperor's wife was wearing down to the tiniest curl. Indeed, the style caught on so well that we know about it from other media as well. From frescoes to cameos to embroidered cloths, Roman women of all social classes seem to have worn their hair like Faustina. In fact, archaeologists have found examples of this hairstyle in places as far away as Jordan and Egypt. So it's clear that this look became the model of feminine virtue, at least for the duration of Faustina's life. And by copying it, Roman women aligned themselves with the philosopher Emperor's vision of stability and order. So if you wanted to be fashionable in the Roman world, you had to keep up with the latest styles from Rome. And when it came to hair, the center of the fashion world was the imperial family, especially the women. And the favorite model setter was the empress. In a society where women could not hold public office and had few public roles, the empress was the one woman whose face could be seen everywhere, on coins, statues, monuments. She became the standard of female beauty, which may be why the empress's hairstyle seems to appear everywhere as well. Of course, not everyone admired this. Roman satirists and moralists complained bitterly about women's obsession with their appearance and their endless hours spent with their ornatresses. The female slaves who dressed and adorned them, Juvenal, the sharp-tongued poet, sneered that women looked like, quote, towering constructions, more artifice than nature. He complained that they bought blonde wigs made from the hair of Germans the Romans had just conquered. He asked, "Is this Rome? Or is this Babylon?" So the very thing that we might call decadence, the Romans saw as effeminate luxury. And yet, what Juvenal hated was precisely what made hair political. To curl hair into elaborate towers was to claim Rome's domination of the world. To wear German hair on a Roman head was to say, "We conquer, and even their bodies become ours to adorn with." To be fashionable was to flaunt one's wealth and power. For men like Juvenal, Roman women had gone too far. They'd abandoned traditional modesty and become slaves to luxury. For him, true Roman women wore their hair plain and simple. But that ideal never really existed, at least not in the Roman world. Of the ancient masterpieces of art, from Greece to Rome, almost without exception, show women with elaborate hairstyles.
Ow.
Even the most famous headdresses were political statements. Consider the diadem. This jeweled headband was originally a symbol of kingship in the ancient Near East. Later, it evolved into a more generic symbol of power and wealth. But no Roman woman could wear it without acknowledging its history. For these women, the diadem was a way of saying, "We are the new pharaohs, the rulers of the ancient world." But what about everyday women? How did they manage to adopt the latest fashions without looking ridiculous? Well, it helped that Roman women had invented a remarkable piece of equipment, the precursor to modern combs and brushes. Archaeologists found these tools throughout the empire, but especially in Pompeii, where they could recreate the styles they saw on the statues and coins of the emperors. In short, it was a tool for empire building. With a flick of the wrist and a turn of the head, every Roman woman could build her own little piece of the Roman world. When you look at Roman statues, especially the female ones, you can't help but notice the hair. It's always elaborate, often enormous. Those sculpted curls and braids weren't just for aesthetics. They were political statements. They told everyone who saw them, "I am Roman." Today, we're going to talk about how Roman women used their hair to express their identity. You can see this most clearly in marble. The busts of empresses were not simply portraits. They were blueprints. A woman could walk into a sculptor's workshop, point to the curls of Julia Domna or the towering braids of Faustina, and say, "Make me like this." Stone did not lie. Once a style was carved, it spread. From Rome to provincial towns, from statues and temples to coins and markets, the image multiplied. The hair of an empress became a political broadcast. Consider Faustina the Younger, wife of Marcus Aurelius. Her portraits show an elegant wave of curls drawn back into a braided bun. The style spread widely, becoming the model of feminine virtue. By copying it, Roman women aligned themselves with the philosopher-emperor's vision of stability and order. So you can imagine how this might have looked in real life. Picture a Roman lady, perhaps in her late teens or early 20s. Adorned in fine linens and jewels, her elaborate hairstyle a crown of curls framing her face. She walks with purpose, not haughty or aloof, but with quiet confidence. Her hair is not just a fashion statement, it's a declaration of identity. It screams, "I am Roman." Of course, not everyone admired this. Roman satirists and moralists complained bitterly. Juvenal, the sharp-tongued poet, mocked women for spending endless hours with their ornatresses, chasing curls, buying wigs of blonde hair imported from captured Germans. He sneered that these women looked like towering constructions, more artifice than nature. His words dripped with scorn. Is this Rome, or is this Babylon, this foreign luxury corrupting us? Yet what Juvenal hated was precisely what made hair political. To curl hair into elaborate towers was to claim Rome's domination of the world. To wear German hair on a Roman head was to say, "We conquer, and even their bodies become ours to adorn with." The Romans didn't just take the spoils of war, they took the spoils of people. In a Mediterranean world where slavery was common, skilled slaves and former captives often found work as artists. Some were surprisingly well treated, like the former pirates serving as the emperor's secretaries. In fact, one was in charge of teaching the imperial children. Their master, the emperor, had been a pirate. Now he ruled the Mediterranean. Hairdressers and barbers were in high demand. Roman men and women paid handsomely for the privilege of having their hair styled by a slave. Hairdressers were so important that they had their own professional organization, the only one of its kind in the ancient world. If you were a barber in ancient Rome, you would have been trained for years before you could work on your own. You would have served an apprenticeship, probably starting when you were young and working for free or very little money. Your master would teach you everything you need to know, including how to make different types of wigs and how to style them. You would also learn how to shave and give massages, because a Roman barber wasn't just a barber, he was also a kind of doctor, bloodletter, and beautician. After several years, you would be allowed to open your own shop. It would be small, maybe with just one chair and a few mirrors. You would work long hours, 6 days a week, and make good money. There would be bad days too, like the day the barber gave the Emperor Nero a haircut, and he hated it so much that he ordered the man put to death. That's why it's a good thing I'm not a barber. Juvenal's rant notwithstanding, this was not just about women. Roman men also sported elaborate hairstyles. It was a sign of masculinity to have long, flowing locks. Short hair was associated with barbarians. In fact, the Romans even had a word for it: short hair. When someone was described as having a short hair, it was considered an insult. Men who cut their hair were seen as effeminate. The longer the hair, the better. There are even reports of Roman men wearing their hair in braids, but this too had its limits. Baldness was an issue for men. There were balding cures, but none really worked. Wigs were popular, but they were expensive. The rich bought them in styles from Greece and Egypt. For the average Roman, the ideal was a compromise between looking good and keeping it simple. The fashion for short curly hair may have started with Alexander the Great, but the Romans perfected it. We must pause here to note something vital. Roman women had no vote. They held no office. Their voices did not echo in the Senate, yet their hair was seen everywhere. Their styles were imitated, criticized, carved in stone, spread on coins. In this way, hair became their voice, silent but visible form of participation in public life. When an empress styled her hair modestly, she lent her weight to an emperor's campaign of moral reform. When she styled it lavishly, she proclaimed the empire's wealth and might. When ordinary women imitated her, they broadcast loyalty. This was politics of a subtler kind, not in words, not in decrees, but in waves and braids and curls. It is striking to realize, even the smallest curl could be read as political. A wave too modest might suggest criticism, an implied rejection of the empire's wealth. A curl too elaborate might seem threatening, a challenge to the dignity of the empress. Thus, Roman hair was never neutral, was a stage upon which empire itself performed. Every strand was a thread in the fabric of Rome's political theater. Behind me stand the very stones of Rome, silent witnesses to the power of a woman's hair. These stones have echoed with the footsteps of emperors and senators, their voices shaping the laws and the life of this great city. But here, high above the bustling streets, in this quiet corner of the Palatine Hill, we find another story written not in marble or bronze, but in strands of spun gold. Here in the ruins of a house once lived a woman whose name was Julia Missa. Her grandson was the emperor, the great Constantine, the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity. But back then, in the days when paganism still held sway, Julia Missa was a devotee of Minerva, the goddess of wisdom. And her worship of Minerva is recorded not in temples or rituals, but in this place, in the very structure of her home. For look here, running along the edge of the terrace, there is a frieze, a series of marble panels carved with images that tell a story. There are processions of gods and heroes, mythical beasts and scenes from daily life. But what catches my eye, what makes my gaze linger, are the hairstyles. Look closely, do you see them? The women here are not merely decorative. Their roles are clear. They are priestesses, attendants, participants in a ritual dedicated to Minerva. But what is this ritual? What is its meaning? The answer lies, of course, in the hair. The central figure is Minerva herself, the goddess of wisdom. And how is she portrayed? As a priestess. Her hair is bound in a simple, severe style, a clear statement of her divine status. Around her are other women, each with a distinct role. Some have elaborate hairstyles, others more plain. Together, they form a chorus, a silent commentary on the main event. For here in the center, held aloft by two priestesses, is a model of the Roman house, complete with furniture and furnishings. This is a sacred marriage, a symbolic union of the goddess with her temple. And the women's hairstyles play a crucial role in this drama. The elaborate ones signify devotion, the simpler styles, restraint. Together, they express the core values of Minerva's cult, the balance between worldly allure and spiritual devotion. But why is this detail so important? Why should we care about the hairstyles of women from ancient Rome? Because in these curls and waves and these braids and knots, we find a world where women participate in politics without actually holding office. Here, in the domestic sphere, far from the clamor of the Senate, women's influence is on display. Through their hairstyles, they express their piety, their devotion, their very identity. They are not merely following fashion, they are making a statement. And who are these women? Some are slaves, some are free, some are young, others old. They come from different social classes, different backgrounds. But united here in their shared devotion, united in their adherence to a particular style, they transcend their differences. For a moment, they are not divided by their social standing, their age, or their individual circumstances. They are a community, a group bound together by a common aesthetic code. As we continue our exploration of ancient Rome, let us always keep this in mind. Women's hairstyles are not just a pretty detail, not just a fashion statement. They are a form of expression, a means of communication, a way of participating in the political life of the city. Every curl, every braid, every wave is a silent but powerful voice, speaking to us across the centuries about the lives, values, and beliefs of the women who wore them. Rome was not just an empire of stone and sand, but an empire of trade. A restless tide of goods and people crossed its seas and deserts, bringing with them stories, sounds, and yes, smells. Amidst the bustling marketplace, amidst the clamor of merchants and haggling customers, one commodity stood out, a silent offering, a whisper against the din: hair. Not just any hair, mind you, but foreign hair, a braid of identity, a tangle of tales. Imagine strolling through the Roman Forum, the heart of the empire, where the great senators held court and debated laws that shaped the world. You see a woman seated before a merchant, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns on a woven basket. The merchant, his eyes sharp, gauges the interest in his wares. His gaze then shifts to a display behind him, not jewels or fine cloth, but a collection of braids and plaits, each holding a story of distant lands. In this world of marble and might, hair was a hidden treasure, a secret weapon. Rome was renowned for its opulence, its grand architecture, and its love for luxury. The Romans, masters of trade, understood the allure of the exotic. As their empire stretched from the deserts of Egypt to the hills of Gaul, they brought home more than just gold and marble. They carried tales of far-off lands, including their most prized possession, foreign hair. To the Romans, blonde hair was a symbol of wealth and power. For them, true blonde was a rare commodity, a treasure found in abundance among the Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine River. These folks were known for their tall frames and striking pale hair, a stark contrast to the native Italians who mostly had darker locks. Beyond the physical traits, the Romans projected an air of wildness, even exoticism onto these northern tribes, a mystique that made their hair all the more desirable. But how did this hair become a symbol of victory? Picture this: a Roman general leading his troops into battle against the fierce tribes of the north. The clash of steel echoes across the valleys as the Romans, with their disciplined ranks and superior tactics, emerge victorious. In the aftermath, the spoils of war included not just the vanquished enemy, but also the vanquished enemy's hair. Captured warriors, some to be sold into slavery, others to have their heads shaved, as a humiliating mark of defeat. The shorn hair, a symbol of subjugation, found its way into the bustling marketplaces of Rome, where it was transformed into a coveted commodity. A skilled Roman hairdresser would take these captured strands and craft them into exquisite wigs. These weren't just any wigs. They were trophies, testaments to the might of Rome. For a Roman matron to don such a wig was to drape herself in the spoils of war, tangible reminder of her husband's victories. Each strand whispering tales of courage and conquest. Yet amidst the tales of war and victory, there's a hint of something more, something intriguing. The Romans associated the blonde hair of the northern barbarians with the women of the north. And not just any women, but those known for their freedom, their independence, and their so-called loose morals, a subtle hint of eroticism. To wear a blonde wig was, in a way, to flirt with danger, to play at being the conquered while firmly rooted in Roman society. It was a silent rebellion, a bold statement. So there you have it, the story of how Rome conquered not just lands and hearts, but also hair, turning a simple strand into a symbol of power, victory, and a touch of forbidden desire. Rome may have fallen, but its legacy lives on, reminding us that sometimes the greatest conquests are the ones we can wear. They say that only the good die young. Well, they were wrong. This is a story about an ancient beauty secret. No, it's not what you think. It's about the ultimate vanity project, one that made millions of rupees in today's money. It's about the multi-billion-dollar wig industry. Now, let's go back in time, back to the days of the Roman Empire. Let's start at the frontier, where traders haggled over prices. Picture a Roman trader at the frontier, purchasing bundles of hair from merchants who gathered it from prisoners, slaves, or even willing sellers seeking coin. The hair was cleaned, sorted, tied into bundles, and then shipped south, perhaps along the Rhine, then across the Alps, and then into the very heart of Rome's markets. There it was sold in shops lined with goods from across the empire. Here's where the story gets really interesting. These bundles of hair were used to make wigs. Now let's meet the people who made these wigs possible. They were called caponi of hair, which literally meant dealers in hair. They were wig makers, experts in their craft. Given how elaborate these wigs were, we can imagine that being a wig maker required skill and training. After all, these were not your average everyday headdresses. Oh no, these were status symbols, expressions of wealth and power. Now let's step into a typical Roman house. Here we see a wealthy woman getting ready for the day. Her hair, a cascade of curls framing her face. But have you ever wondered how those elaborate hairstyles stayed in place? What kept those curls from unraveling during a busy day? The answer is simple, yet surprisingly modern: a wig. Now here's a question for you. How many wigs did this woman own? Is one enough for daily use? Or did she need a whole collection? Remember, each wig took weeks to make, and they were as much a fashion statement as a functional accessory. So it's not out of the question to imagine this woman owning several wigs, each stored in an ivory box, carefully combed and oiled by her slaves. With these, she could transform herself daily, becoming whoever she wanted to be or whoever the occasion demanded. But why wigs? What purpose did they serve apart from adding to the beauty of the wearer? You see, Roman women were known for their elaborate hairstyles, often adorned with ribbons, flowers, or even jewelry. But achieving these looks required hours of work. Slaves would spend countless hours braiding, curling, and arranging their mistress's hair into intricate designs. Not only was this tedious, but also risky. A slip of the comb or a careless twist could ruin the hairstyle, which would be a disaster for a woman of status. Wigs provided a convenient solution. The intricate curls could be preset, the braids pre-woven. To prepare for a banquet, a woman could simply lift the wig from its box, set it upon her head, and fasten it in place. This not only saved time, but also ensured a perfect hairstyle every single day. But there's more to the story. Wigs were more than just a time saver. They were also a symbol of feminine power. In a society where men held most of the power, women had their own ways of wielding influence. And what better way to do so than by looking your best? A wig allowed a woman to present the version of herself that society demanded: youthful, full, untouched by time. It was not just a fashion accessory, it was a shield against the world. It hid imperfections, gave confidence, and projected an image of perfection. So next time you see someone wearing a wig, remember, you're seeing only what's on the surface. Beneath that carefully crafted headdress lies a story of vanity, power, perhaps even a touch of desperation. So, when you think of ancient Rome, what do you see? Toilets made of gold and ivory, marble palaces, chariots racing through the forum, and then there's hair. Romans weren't natural blondes, but they sure liked to act like they were. They also experimented with dyes. Some recipes survive in Roman texts. One promised to darken hair by boiling walnut shells. Another aimed to redden with henna. Still another suggested the use of ash and vinegar. But blonde, blonde was the obsession. Women smeared their hair with saffron, with powdered gold, with strange concoctions of herbs and minerals, all in pursuit of brightness. Some would sit in the sun after applying these mixtures, hoping the rays would lighten their locks. And so, hair became chemistry, a laboratory of vanity and invention. But why were these golden glimmers so obsessed with going blonde? Well, for one thing, it was a sign of high status. In a society where most people had dark hair, being a blonde meant that you had access to luxury goods, rare ingredients, the leisure time to mess with your hair. That last one is important because while Rome liked its blondes, it did not like its divas. A woman who spent too much time on her appearance, who took too much care with her beauty routine, she was seen as vain and frivolous, and no one wanted to be that. So having your hair done right was a careful balancing act, a demonstration of feminine wiles without being too much. Here's how it went down. First, the hair was washed, often in urine. Then the dye was applied, wrapped in a cloth, and left to sit for hours. Sometimes a hot iron was used to help the color set. And finally, once the concoction was rinsed out, the hair was dried in the sun, wind, or sometimes under a dryer.
Oh, that's right. A hairdryer.
Invented in Greece around 300 BCE, it consisted of a bowl of hot water, a hand crank, and a leather tube. I don't know about you, but that sounds more complicated than my current blow dryer. Of course, not everyone could afford these fancy tools and treatments. For the lower classes, a good strong black dye was often good enough to cover up the gray or the unwanted reddish tones that came with aging. But the wealthy were not so easily satisfied. They wanted something more, something uniquely Roman. They wanted to shine. We must remember, in Rome, life was public. Banquets, games, processions, all were stages. And on these stages, wigs became costumes. Imagine entering the theater of Pompey. The crowd gathers, the marble steps gleam. Women arrive, their wigs shimmering. One with coils of blonde curls, another with deep black braids, another with a towering mass of auburn. Each style catches the eye, which declares rank, wealth, and taste. The wig was not hidden. It was not shameful. It was proudly worn, part of the spectacle of Rome itself. One type of wig, the so-called capital, was even named after the goddess Minerva, a way of showing off one's devotion to the patron deity of Rome itself. There was also the tonsure, favored by the elite, a close-cropped cut that required regular shaving. This style was practical for chariot racing. Riding astride a horse, you need a good, strong grip. It's not something you can get with a flowing mane of hair. Plus, if you're an equestrian, as was the case with many Roman men, you need a clear view of the charioteer in front of you. Your way, you're going to see him if your hair is in your eyes. The tonsure was also an easy way to make sure your head stayed cool in the Roman heat. Just make sure your barber is a skilled craftsman. Otherwise, you might end up looking like this. But why stop at your own hair? Why not dye your eyebrows and eyelashes to match? And then there's beard dye. Mustaches were considered attractive in Rome. They showed off the shape of your face, the strength of your jawline. But the neatly groomed beard that was reserved for the gods, by dyeing their beards, men declared themselves divine. This wasn't limited to emperors. Any Roman could don a golden beard. Any man who wanted to look like he owned the world. Of course, not all approved. The poets, ever ready to sneer, mocked the obsession. Martial, with his sharp wit, wrote scornfully of women who changed their hair daily. One day a redhead, the next day a blonde, the next day dark-haired. He laughed that he never knew who he was speaking to, the woman herself or her wig. To him, the wig was deception, artifice. But his very mockery tells us how widespread the practice was. For satire only bites when the subject is familiar. Thus, in Martial's complaints, we glimpse a Rome where wigs filled markets, adorned banquets, and shifted identities daily. The Roman Emperor Hadrian famously sported a wig made of the hair of his beloved. The poet Martial himself, who bemoaned the fact that his master's wig was giving him a headache. There is an image of a Roman woman in a wig collection, a visual joke, a play on words, a kind of pun. The inscription on the base of the statue reads, "Beware of the bald beneath the curls." The sculptor is having his way with the viewer, teasing us with a visual riddle. Does she wear a wig or not? If she does, what is beneath it? These are the kinds of questions that occupied the minds of Romans as they encountered this sculpture in the artist's workshop or strolling through the forum. It was a visual game, a game of hide and seek, a tease, a jest. Beneath the shimmering surface of the wig, there is a darker truth. The ornatresses, the hairdressers, not only styled the hair, they also cared for the wigs. They washed them, perfumed them, combed them with ivory pins, stored them carefully in boxes, guarded them against moths. For the slave, the wig was both a burden and a craft. To maintain the luster of foreign hair, to arrange it upon the mistress's head just so. This was labor unseen but essential. In this way, wigs carried stories not only of conquest and wealth, but also of the silent hands that tended them. This is a story about power, desire, and deception, about far-off lands and familiar faces, about the weight of gold and the value of a glance. It is a story that the Romans loved to tell and tell again, a story that lives on in our stories today. In ancient Rome, you could buy blonde hair, not for yourself, of course. You could buy it to put on your head. By wearing this particular style, you were making a statement. You were saying, I am Roman. Romans loved to play with their identity, to transform themselves, to experiment with who they were and how they appeared to others. And what better way to do that than with a wig? Wigs allowed Romans to play with identity. To wear blonde hair was to wear Germanness, at least in part. To wear sleek Eastern hair was to wear foreign allure. A Roman woman could shift her appearance, trying on fragments of empire. Today she was Roman, tomorrow she was exotic. But always beneath the wig, she remained herself. The wig was both transformation and reminder. A reminder that Rome absorbed the world, even its hair. Close your eyes again. Imagine the market stalls of Rome, the cries of sellers, the scent of spices, the gleam of jewelry. And their boxes of hair, blonde shining in the sun, black, glossy, auburn rich. Women pause, touch, choose. Slaves carry the purchases home. That night at a banquet, wigs shimmer by torchlight, each a fragment of empire woven into style. Hair, once rooted in distant heads, now crowns Rome's elite. In the 1st century, a Roman writer named Pliny the Younger described a woman whose elaborate headdress included not one but 2 wigs. She wore one on top of the other, and even that wasn't enough. She pinned a 3rd one on top of that, creating a towering structure that was then adorned with jewels and flowers. It was a bold look, but it was also a look that said, I am Roman. You see? Rome was a city that prided itself on its conquest of the known world. And what better way to display that conquest than by wearing the spoils of war on your head? In a way, the women of Rome were the original conquerors. They were the ones who took the resources, the people, the culture, the very hair of the conquered, and made it their own. They were the ones who turned the exotic into the fashionable. But not everyone could afford to buy hair from conquered peoples. For the poor, there was always the option of the cheaper wig made from wool or linen. But even the cheapest wig was a luxury item. In a world where women's status was often determined by their beauty, a wig could make all the difference. It was a way to enhance your appearance, to make yourself more attractive, to climb the social ladder. In a city full of women striving to be the most beautiful, the best dressed, the most talked about, a wig was the ultimate accessory. It was a symbol of wealth and power. It was a way to make a statement. It was a way to say, I am Roman. Now open your eyes. You're in Rome. The year is 1880. The place. The bustling Via del Corso. The women are elegant, their dresses flowing, their hats perched atop their heads. And then there she is, Isabella, a young woman with a secret. Beneath her stylish hat, Isabella hides a wig. It's a simple black bob, nothing fancy, but to Isabella, it's everything. You see, Isabella has a secret. Right. Her hair is not her own. It's a secret she's kept for years. Ever since she was a young girl growing up in a small village outside of Rome, her family were farmers, poor but proud. They had a small farm with a few acres of land and a house with a dirt floor and a roof made of straw. Life was hard, but it was honest. Then one day a stranger came to the village. He was a wealthy Roman senator, and he was looking for a wife. Had heard that the women of this village were beautiful, and he wanted one for himself. He offered Isabella's father a fortune for her hand in marriage, and though her father didn't want to part with his only child, he couldn't refuse the offer. So he agreed to the marriage, and Isabella became the senator's wife. Now, When Isabella first arrived at the senator's house, she was shocked. It was a palace, really, with marble floors and gold leafing everywhere. There were servants scurrying about, slaves waiting at hand and foot, and a garden with fountains and statues. But there was something else that caught Isabella's eye, the senator's wife, who was older than him. But she was beautiful, with flowing robes and a towering wig. She was everything Isabella was not. For weeks, Isabella felt out of place. She didn't know how to behave in such a grand house. She didn't know how to talk to the senator's guests. And she didn't know what to do with her hair. Her mother had taught her how to braid her long, thick locks, but here in the senator's house, that was not enough. Every morning, the older woman would summon Isabella and tell her to sit while she dressed her hair. Every day she would put on a new wig. Sometimes they were blonde, sometimes they were brown, sometimes they were red. But no matter what color they were always beautiful. And Isabella longed to be like the older woman, to be like the other noble women she saw around her, to be like the women whose pictures were in the fashion magazines. She wanted to be beautiful, to be desired, to be talked about. She wanted to be Roman. And so she began to save her money. Every coin she earned from working in the fields, she put into a jar until she had enough to buy a wig of her own. One day, Isabella went to the market and bought a simple black bob. It was made of wool, but it looked just like the finest human hair. She took it home and put it on, and she knew in that moment that she was no longer just Isabella, the farmer's daughter. She was Isabella, the senator's wife. She was Isabella, Roman. Romans weren't just vain, they were superstitious. And what was that thing that they used to express their devotion? Hair. Roman men and women believed their bodies were gifts from the gods, vessels for the divine. And like any gift, you took care of it. You dressed it up. You made offerings to keep it in good shape, because that was a reflection of the gods themselves. For men, that meant oils, perfumes, combs, and tweezers. For women, it meant elaborate styles, jewels, and veils. The wealthier women even had slaves to do their hair. But it wasn't just about looking good. It was about staying connected to the gods. See, Romans believed your hair connected you to the divine, to the spirits of your ancestors, and to the cycles of life and death. How you wore your hair, how much you showed or hid, all of it was a prayer, an offering to the gods. Now let's talk about the big chop. Some men kept their hair short, almost like a modern fade, while others grew it long, like down to their shoulders. Long hair was a symbol of masculinity back in the day. And if you were a Roman man with long hair, you were considered pretty hot. You see, the longer you kept your hair, the more successful you were believed to be in life. Short hair was for the common folk, soldiers and slaves. Long hair was for the elites, the rich and influential men who could afford to maintain it. Plus, it was a status symbol, a way to show off your wealth and power. The oil and perfume alone that you needed to keep that long hair smelling good would have cost a fortune. Then we have the bald and the shaved. Some men shaved their heads as a fashion statement, kind of like a monk's tonsure. Others went bald because, well, genetics. See, balding was common in ancient Rome, just like now. In fact, the Romans had their own cure for baldness, a kind of lotion made from, well, bare fat. It was so popular that women of all social classes used it. But don't go slathering bare fat on your head just yet. Experts say it didn't really work and might have even caused more hair loss. Finally, there were the tonsured. A tonsure is a fancy word for a shaved circle on the top of your head. Soldiers and priests were often tonsured. It was a way to identify them, to set them apart from the rest. But for ordinary Romans, it was a sign of something else, a way to show devotion to the emperor. You see, when Rome was at war, citizens would often shave their heads as a way to show support for the troops. It was a way to say, we're all in this together. So the next time you look at a Roman statue or bust, take a close look at the hair. It's not just a pretty detail. It's a story of a civilization that believed the gods lived among them, that every strand of hair was a whisper of the divine. What does your hair say about you? For the Romans, everything. It marked social status, age, even marital prospects. And how they cut, colored, or styled their hair told a silent but significant story to all who saw them. One of the most significant rituals came in childhood. Roman boys and girls both wore an amulet around their necks. Boys the bulla, girls the lunula, symbols of protection during their youth. But when a boy reached manhood, usually in his mid-teens, He underwent a solemn transition. He set aside his boyish toga and donned the toga of adulthood. And with this change came another, the cutting of his first beard or locks. These strands were not discarded casually, were dedicated often to a household god or to a temple. The young man left behind not only hair, but childhood itself. In those strands lay innocence, play, protection, now surrendered to the divine. Girls, too, had hair rituals. Before marriage, they might dedicate childhood locks to the gods, preparing themselves for new roles as wives. The shedding of hair was thus the shedding of one life, the beginning of another. You can see how a culture's perspective on hair can shape its history. To learn more about the role of hair in different societies, stay tuned. Now, let's return to ancient Rome. In the world of Roman men, hair was a statement. Wealthy Romans, both men and women, favored a style known as the poll, short on the sides and back and longer on top. This style allowed for a variety of looks, depending on how the top was styled or decorated. It was practical, it was fashionable, and it could be a canvas for self-expression. Senators and higher-ranking officials often chose elaborate hairstyles, sometimes using gold or jeweled combs to accent their status. They also used hair as a political tool, adorning their heads with wreaths or garlands to signify civic duty, religious observance, or even military victories. These symbols were not just decorative, they were a way to convey one's identity and achievements to the public. But the most important hair-related event in a Roman man's life came when he married. Roman men typically married in their early 20s, and the bride's family would often pay for the groom's new ceremonial garments, including a special white toga called the candida toga. This toga was a symbol of the man's transition to adulthood and his new responsibilities as a husband and future father. Hair played an equally important role in the lives of Roman women. From the time they were young girls, Roman women were expected to cover their heads with a special type of veil called a flammeum. This was a long, thin piece of fabric that was attached to a headband and flowed down the back, covering the woman's hair. The flammeum was a symbol of a woman's status as a Roman citizen and was worn by women of all social classes. However, the style and decoration of the flammeum varied depending on the occasion. For example, a young girl's flammeum might be decorated with flowers or ribbons, while a married woman's flammeum might be more subdued. But perhaps the most iconic Roman hairstyle was that of the bride. A Roman bride did not wear her hair in her everyday style. Instead, it was arranged in a very particular fashion, the seni crines. This consisted of 6 braids, parted with the tip of a spear. Yes, a spear. This may seem like a strange detail, but it was actually a very important part of the ritual. The gesture symbolized both protection and ancient memory. Some said it recalled the Sabine women, carried off by Roman men in the city's early days. Others believed it linked the bride to warrior strength, a reminder that marriage was not merely personal, but civic. Binding families, strengthening Rome. The 6 braids themselves may have symbolized the bride's transition from childhood to adulthood, as well as her new duties as a wife and potential mother. Each braid could represent a different aspect of her life, such as her family, her status, or even her hopes for the future. Once her hair was braided, the bride's head was covered with a veil that was attached to a special crown-like headpiece. The veil was not just a decorative element, but also served to protect the bride from evil spirits and bad omens. After the wedding ceremony, the veil and headpiece were removed, and the bride wore her hair in the seni crines for the rest of her life. This signified her married status and also served as a reminder of her civic duty to her husband and family. So you can see that Roman hair wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a way of life. Whether it was the elaborate styles of the elite or the simple veil of the working woman, each person's hair told the story of their life and their place in Roman society. Hair, it's the ultimate accessory, the crowning glory. Or is it? For the ancient Romans, hair was more than just a style statement. It was a way to express oneself, to communicate without words, to lay bare one's soul. But Roman hair stories are not all glamorous toga parties and victory parades. There's a darker side to those flowing locks and sculpted beards, tale of loss, grief, and the lengths to which Romans would go to express their sorrow. You might think a haircut is a personal choice, a way to look your best or try out a new trend. But back in Rome, a bald head wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a serious declaration. A clean-shaven head was a sign of mourning, a way to show you were going through something tough. This wasn't some fleeting fancy. We're talking about a full-on ritual. Men would shave their heads as part of their funeral rites. It was like a solemn oath, a visible promise of their deep sorrow. But why the extreme measure? What did a bald head signify? Well, it was all about showing respect and making a connection to the dead. When someone lost a loved one, they weren't just feeling sad. They believed that person was gone, but also a part of them had gone too. And what better way to show that than by altering your own appearance? It was a physical manifestation of that inner turmoil, a visible representation of their grief. By shaving their heads, Romans were not only honoring the dead, they were also showing how much the loss affected them. Now you might be thinking that's a bit intense. Why couldn't they just wear a hat or use a scarf to cover up? But that's where it gets really interesting, you see. In Roman culture, hair wasn't just about personal style. It was a way to convey messages and emotions. It was a form of nonverbal communication. When someone shaved their head, everyone around them knew they were grieving. There was no need for words. The bald head spoke volumes. It was a silent scream of sorrow, a visible void where a crown of hair used to be. And it wasn't just men who shaved their heads. Women did it too. They might have let their hair fall unbound and uncombed, a tangled mess where elegant styles once stood. Some women even chopped their hair short, not as an offering to the gods, but as a tribute to the dead. Severing one's locks was a big deal. It was like giving up a piece of oneself, a visible sacrifice to honor the departed. In the Roman world, hair wasn't just a fashion accessory or a symbol of personal style. It was a powerful form of expression, a way to communicate emotions, beliefs, and values. From the elaborate hairstyles of the elite to the simple braids of the common folk, every strand told a story. It was a silent narrative that wove through the streets of Rome, hanging in the breeze like an unwritten poem. During the height of the Roman Empire, the streets of Rome were a bustling marketplace of ideas, goods, and gossip. Amidst the lively chatter and the clanging of tools, there was another sound. The snip of shears and the rustle of freshly cut hair. But these weren't just your average haircuts. Each snip and every strand had a story to tell. For the common folk of Rome, hair was a way to make ends meet. A barber wasn't just a stylist. He was an entrepreneur, a small business owner trying to make an honest living. In a city of nearly 1 million people, there was always demand for a good haircut. So while the elite flaunted intricate hairstyles and luxurious beards, the commoners found ways to express themselves within their means. Imagine a barber shop nestled between a bakery and a shoemaker's stall. The air thick with the scent of fresh bread and leather. Inside, men of all ages sit on simple stools, their heads bent in anticipation as the barber's shears do their work. Some ask for a trim, others for a bold new style. And as the barber works his magic, they chat about the latest news, swapping stories and catching up on the gossip. In this humble setting, the barber isn't just a stylist, he's a confidant, a silent witness to the joys and sorrows of everyday life. He sees the city through the eyes of those he serves, hearing their hopes and dreams as he snips away the weeks and months. For many, it's more than just a haircut. It's a moment of respite, a chance to connect with others and to be seen. The barber's shop becomes a microcosm of Roman life, a place where the boundaries between classes are blurred, so all that is left are the shared stories and the snip of shears against skin. And as the sun sets over the Roman Forum, casting long shadows across the city, the men leave the shop, their heads held high, their new haircuts a symbol of resilience and the enduring spirit of the Roman people. Yet not all uses were noble. Hair could also slip into shadow. In Roman magic, hair was a potent ingredient. Witches in literature were said to steal locks from sleeping victims, weaving them into spells. To possess someone's hair was to possess part of their essence. The poet Ovid describes love charms, curses, even bindings that required hair. A lock burned in a ritual fire might call passion, or ruin, or sickness. Hair was thus double-edged, sacred in temples, dangerous in sorcery. Close your eyes and picture a Roman household. A boy stands before the family altar, a curl cut from his head, laid gently before the gods. A bride, her 6 braids parted by a spear, walks solemnly toward her new life. A widow, hair loose, weeps beside a bier. A priestess, her braids wound with ribbons, tends the eternal flame. In each scene, hair speaks. Not as style, not as vanity, but as prayer, as grief, as vow, as magic. The Romans knew to touch hair was to touch the soul.
Ouch.
Now let's get to the most important part of this story. We want to hear from you. Tell us about a time when you touched someone's hair and you felt like you were touching their soul. Maybe it was a child's soft, downy hair, a lover's flowing locks, an elder's wisps touched by the sun and the wind. When and where was it? What made it significant? Was it a moment of tenderness, of connection, of understanding? You're storying with us in the world. Who knows whose soul you might touch with your words? In the bustling city of Rome, where ancient stones whispered tales of emperors and conquests, lived a young woman named Livia. Her hair, a cascade of raven black, reached past her waist. Said to be the envy of every woman in Rome. But Livia found no joy in its silky abundance. You see, she was cursed. The touch of her fingers, wherever they grazed, turned to ash. A fatal gift from a jealous goddess, you might think. So Livia lived in fear, her nimble hands hidden, her heart heavy with loneliness. One day, driven by despair, she sought out the oracle of Delphi, her only hope for a cure. The journey was long and fraught with peril, but Livia, desperate for a solution, pressed on. Finally, she stood before the altar of the gods, the air thick with incense and anticipation. As the high priestess uttered the cryptic prophecy, Livia heard these words: a willing heart, a soul laid bare. Only in love's embrace can the curse find its end. But what did it mean? Confused and troubled, Livia returned to Rome, the prophecy echoing in her ears. That night, as she gazed at her reflection, a plan began to form. She would seek out a lover, entrust her fate to his touch, hoping to break the curse that had stolen her peace. But who could she trust? Then she thought of Marcus, a childhood friend, a confidant she had secretly loved for years. He was kind, compassionate, and brave. Could he be the one to help her? With newfound determination, Livia set out to find Marcus, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. Would he accept her, love her enough to touch her, break the curse that had held her captive for so long? Or would he, like so many before him, recoil in terror at the thought of touching her deadly hands? Only time would tell. Long after flesh withers and bones turn to dust, a lock of hair can remain. The Romans noticed this permanence, and in that endurance, they found meaning. Hair became memory, a trace of a person preserved beyond time. A single strand can tell a story of identity, of attachment, of loss. It whispers of a life lived and loved, a life that death itself can't quite silence. This is the last chapter of a series. I will wander through those memories, in portraits, in tombs, in keepsakes, in afterlife beliefs. Through hair, the Romans sought to hold on, even when life slipped away. Step into the quiet galleries of Roman portrait busts. Marble faces gaze back at us, lips still, eyes unseeing. And yet carved upon their heads, hair lives. Sculptors paid astonishing attention to coiffure. A noblewoman's elaborate curls, a senator's combed strands, a youth's tousled locks. All are captured in stone. Why? Because hair, more than clothing or jewelry, signaled identity. Fashion shifted. Bodies aged. But hair, frozen in a chosen style, marked a person in memory. Even today, scholars use hairstyles on statues to date them. Not by inscription, but by the sweep of a curl, the twist of a braid, the lift of a fringe. Hair became a clock of history, ticking silently across dynasties. Beyond marble, hair itself was kept. Romans, like many cultures, treasured locks of the living and the dead. A mother might preserve a child's first curl. A widow might hold a braid of her husband's hair. A soldier might send a strand to his beloved before leaving for war. Small containers, boxes, lockets, even rings, sometimes held these precious tokens. To touch such hair was to touch the absent, to feel presence in absence. For Romans, who believed in the lingering power of the body, such keepsakes were more than sentiment. They were fragments of the person, carrying essence, spirit, life. The most famous of these relics are the golden curls said to have adorned the heads of Romulus and Remus, the legendary twin founders of Rome. In art, their hair is the stuff of divinity, immortal, untouchable, eternally golden. Here, a suckling infant, divinely inspired, cradles a lock of red hair. It is said to be the boy Romulus, destined to become king of a new people. Across the Tiber, in the church of Santa Maria in Cosmedon, a mosaic depicts Romulus, older now, but still a boy. In his right hand, a scepter, a symbol of kingship to come. In his left, a lock of golden hair. Here the twins are parted, Romulus, the future Rome, reaching out to gather up the strands of fate. Their hair is a tangible link to their divine origins, a reminder that the greatest city in the world is founded on the blood and destiny of twins. But what of the countless others whose stories didn't make it into legend, whose hair didn't turn to gold, whose fates weren't fabled? For ordinary Romans, death was a constant companion. Life was fragile, easily extinguished by illness, poverty, war. Death, too, touched the emperor's family, the Julio-Claudians, perhaps the most famous dynasty in Roman history. Augustus, the first emperor, ushered in 2 centuries of rule. His descendants married into and adopted by each other, creating a web of uncles and cousins, aunts and nieces, all potential heirs. Yet most died young. In the year 14, after a reign of 51 years, Augustus passed the purple cloak to Tiberius. But he didn't pass on his looks. Look closely at their portraits. Augustus has a long, straight nose and full lips. Tiberius doesn't. He has the aquiline nose and thin lips of his grandmother, Julia, and her father, Augustus's great-uncle, Julius Caesar. This little detail tells us much. Tiberius wasn't just an obscure branch on the family tree. He descended directly from Caesar, the most famous Roman of the previous age. As Augustus groomed Tiberius for power, he also groomed him for public image. When the boy was born, the emperor gave him the name Tiberius Nero. It was a strong, active name like his father's, and it echoed with the legacy of Rome's greatest hero, Romulus. Yet the child grew up as Tiberius Claudius. Why the change? We don't know. Perhaps it was a nickname, something closer, more intimate. Or perhaps it was a deliberate choice, a way to distance the heir from the founder, to shape a new identity for a new Rome. Tiberius died in 37, having ruled for 23 years. Like many of his family, his looks were a puzzle. Some say he inherited Augustus's nose and eyes. Others say no, he looked like his grandfather, so much so that people called him Little Caesar. That image may have been a burden. How could he live up to Rome's greatest hero, or was it a comfort? Was he destined for greatness because he resembled the past? We don't know. What we do know is that his hair was the color of bronze. When he died, his mother Livia commissioned a statue in his honor. It was placed in the atrium of their home, the place where emperors received important guests. So when visitors stepped inside, they would have seen the boy, emperor, young and beautiful, with his bronze hair and haunting eyes. Forever frozen in his prime, a reminder of the greatness Rome had lost, a promise of the greatness that might return. How did Romans remember the dead? Primarily through images, portraits, statues, mosaics, and paintings. These were designed to capture the likeness of a person, to keep their features and even their personality alive. Sometimes a single work captured both beauty and character, as in the portrait of Poppaea Sabina, wife of Nero, whose flowing red hair mirrors her fiery spirit. Other times, it took a series to capture the sitter. Like the images of the Empress Julia Misa, these idealized images carefully crafted to project power and perfection. They made ordinary people feel very different from themselves. So what if you could step into the studio while the artist was at work, see how the real empress looked, not as a goddess, but as a woman? The artist's sketches were bolder, more critical, more like Misa herself. No wonder her daughter Julia later destroyed them. Have you ever noticed how often people on ancient Roman coins have elaborate hairstyles? Well, it turns out there's a lot more to these elaborate daws than meets the eye. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about hair in ancient Rome. Now, if you've watched my series on ancient beauty secrets, then you already know that Romans paid a lot of attention to their hair. Both men and women carefully crafted their looks, and there are hundreds of surviving examples of Roman hairstyles from frescoes, statues, and busts. as well as written instructions for creating them. Today, however, I want to talk about how the Romans remembered the dead through the gift of hair. Because if you look around Roman tombs and funerary art, guess what? Hair appears again and again. In reliefs, the deceased are often depicted with the hairstyle they wore in life, carefully arranged and forever remembered. A woman with the towering curls of Flavian fashion would be carved with that exact style, ensuring she was recognized as herself. A man with a neatly combed fringe or cropped soldier-esque cut would be immortalized the same way. In other words, hair was memory carved in stone. A final portrait, not of an abstract soul, but of real appearance. And sometimes locks of actual hair were sealed into tombs. They were mingled with ashes or laid with offerings, a material reminder that life had passed, but traces remained. Hair also carried generational weight. Father's cropped cut might be echoed in his sons. A mother's braids might appear again in her daughters. Across marble busts and family portraits, we see echoes, styles repeated, preserved, cherished. In this way, hair-bound family lines, linking ancestors to descendants. To see a hairstyle was not only to see an individual, but to glimpse heritage. The Romans also believed that the dead continued to exist in some form after death, specifically as the manes, which were considered to be the spirits of the dead that lingered and could be honored by the living. So what did the dead need their hair for? Maybe nothing. But cutting and offering your own hair at a grave was a way of sharing essence with the departed. To bridge the divide between the world of the living and the world of the dead, the poet Catullus even wrote of offerings at his brother's tomb, tokens of devotion. These offerings were often made up of hair and garments, and they were sometimes accompanied by prayers or pleas. Other poems speak of tearing hair in grief, as if by giving up one's hair, one could more closely follow the dead in spirit. Now, it's important to note that not all Roman hairstyles were equal. Often the styles associated with elite women and men were more elaborate and took more time to create. However, across social classes, the Romans of the past took great pride in their appearance and saw their outer presentation as a reflection of their inner selves. This is especially evident in funerary art, where regardless of social status, the deceased were often portrayed with their hair carefully styled, to represent both individuality and continuity across the threshold of death. In fact, the Romans kept the hair of the dead for much the same reason they kept their coins with elaborate hairstyles. In both cases, it was a way of preserving identity and continuity in a rapidly changing world. As the Roman Empire expanded, new territories and cultures were conquered and incorporated into the vast web of the empire. This led to significant changes in Roman culture, including the adoption of new customs, beliefs, and values. Despite these changes, the Romans found ways to hold on to their traditions and their sense of identity. And one of those ways was through their art and their coins. The elaborate hairstyles depicted on Roman coins and funerary art served as a reminder of who they were and where they came from, even as the empire changed and evolved around them. In the grand galleries of Roman tombs, amidst the haunting silence, a peculiar detail catches the eye. The hair, it seems, is making a comeback. At first glance, it's the faces that demand attention, the marble or bronze visage of the deceased, frozen in an eternal slumber. Yet as the gaze lingers, something else emerges from the depths of time. The hair, carefully arranged, flows, curls, coils, or falls in precise, intricate patterns, each strand seemingly placed with intention. It's as though the hair, like the countenance it frames, has been summoned back from oblivion to play its part in the drama of remembrance. But why does this recur so frequently in the art of remembrance? Why is the hair so meticulously depicted? What is it about these lifeless tresses that hold such importance for the Romans in their rituals of remembrance? The answer, as with so many things in Roman culture, lies in the concept of memoria, memory. In the Roman world, memory wasn't just a passive act of recollection. It was an act of duty, a vital force that kept the past alive in the present. It was through acts of remembrance that the Romans believed they could honor the dead, ensure their legacy, and maintain a connection with their heritage. And what better way to remember a person than by preserving the very essence of their physical form, their image, their likeness? Or what did they value more highly than the outward signs of identity, the features that framed the face, the hair? For the Romans, the visual presentation of the self was of utmost importance. The way one dressed, the ornaments they wore, all were deliberate choices meant to convey status, personality, and identity. And at the center of this carefully crafted presentation was, again, the hair. A woman's stowering curls, or a man's neatly combed fringe, or soldier's cut, was more than just a fashion statement. It was a defining characteristic, a symbol of individuality. And when that person passed away, it was crucial to remember them as they were in life, complete with the hairstyle that was their trademark. Furthermore, hairstyles often served as a link to family and ancestry. A father's cropped military cut might be echoed in his son's, while a mother's intricate braids might reappear in her daughter's. In a society that placed a premium on lineage and family ties, this repetition of styles across generations served as a tangible reminder of one's roots, a way of honoring one's ancestors through the very style of one's hair. But the emphasis on hair in Roman funerary art and poetry goes beyond just aesthetics. It delves into the realm of the numinous, the spiritual essence that animates the physical form. The Romans believed that the soul, the spirit of the deceased, the persona, lingered after death, hovering around the tomb and waiting to be acknowledged by the living. And what better way to pay homage to the dead than by offering them something they cherished in life, their favorite perfume, a beloved toy, or even a lock of their hair? By placing these objects at the tomb, the living could demonstrate their devotion and ensure the spirit's tranquility. In the poignant verses of Catullus, the Roman poet who lamented the loss of his brother, we see this theme of hair woven into the fabric of grief. He writes of offering a lock of his own hair to the dead, mingling it with wine and dropping it into the urn that holds his brother's ashes. It's a heart-wrenching image of a brother's love transcending the boundaries of life and death. In the broader context of Roman culture, these poetic expressions found resonance. Throughout the empire, people tore their hair in mourning, a physical act of anguish that symbolized the uprooting of a vital part of their existence, their connection to their loved ones. By shedding hair, they were participating in a larger narrative, a story of loss and remembrance that had been told and retold since the dawn of human emotion. As you stand before the weathered stones or smooth marble of Roman tombs, your gaze tracing the contours of long-dead faces, consider the hair, those lifeless tresses frozen in time. They are not merely ornamental, but a testament to the enduring power of memory. They are a silent echo of lives lived, loves lost, and spirits that linger, forever entwined with the tales of the ancients. We remember Roman emperors today, not for their words or their deeds, but for their hair. We speak of the Flavian wave, the Antonine curls, the Severan locks. And though we admire these styles for their elegance or power, we don't often consider why Romans thought them so important. Why was it that a new emperor inaugurated a new era not with a speech but with a new haircut? What did these carefully sculpted waves and curls say about Rome and its people? To answer these questions, we have to think like Romans. And to do that, we begin with the end, with death. In the late Republic and early Empire, it was customary for a family to bury or place in a tomb a small box containing the personal effects of the deceased. A coin purse, a ring, a mirror, and often a lock of hair. This ritual was not exclusive to women. Men, too, had their hair braided and deposited in urns. And the practice wasn't limited to the elite. All over the empire, in villas and in barracks, people placed their most treasured possession, their most intimate adornment, in a box and sealed it away. But why? Because in death, as in life, hair was identity. A young girl's elaborate curls announced her age and status. A middle-aged woman's bun showed she was married. An older woman's braids signified her wisdom and experience. Meant, too, the style you wore identified you. Soldiers in the legions tonsured on the sides and shaved on the top were icily identified as subjects of Rome. Slaves, meanwhile, often wore their hair long, as a symbol of freedom and an attribute of the gods. In fact, the most common ornament for a Roman woman was a simple fillet, a band worn around the head to keep the hair out of one's face while working. But what set the Romans apart was their innovation and variety. They invented curling irons to achieve the perfect spiral. They used combs to create height and lift. They adorned their styles with flowers and jewels and ribbons. Nothing was too precious, too grand, too humble for Roman hair. In other words, whatever your status in life, you could rely on one constant: the style you chose to wear would become part of the record. A physical manifestation of who you were, what you valued, and how you saw yourself. And if you were a Roman emperor, your style would be a kind of shorthand for the entire era you ruled. A single image that captured the spirit of an entire age. The Flavian wave, for instance, was more than just a hairstyle. It was a political statement. When the Flavians came to power in 69 AD, they inaugurated a new era of stability and prosperity. And so it was fitting that their look should convey peace and plenty. The long, loose curls cascading down the shoulders symbolized the abundance of the age. The carefully waved and curled hair of the elite spoke of leisure and luxury. The simple, severe hairstyles of the common folk suggested order and discipline. So when you look at a Roman bust with idealized curls, remember that sculpture took time. The artist wasn't just shaping marble, he was crafting an image that would last for centuries. Those curls were meant to impress, to inspire awe and admiration. They were the outward expression of an inward transformation. They were the emperor's crown,